Good morning, everyone. I'm gonna try to admit as many people. We got a lot of people coming in now. Um, yeah, there we go. I'm Richard Swanson. I'm Senior Advisor for our Western region. I'm also the Acting Director for our U.S. Commercial Service Office in Irvine, California. And I'm working together with Sandra here from the LA Chamber and Peter as well. Want to thank Maurice and Simona for putting all this together through the State of California Office of Economic Development, GoBiz, who graciously funded this program. And we want to say thank you to everyone. Today's program, this is part of the Regional Export Training and Assistance Program, RETAP. Sandra, do you mind admitting these folks into the room? Thank you. This is workshop number 4, Find and Enter Best Export Markets. This is a great session. I'll sort of kick it off here, and then I'll turn it over to my esteemed colleague of many years, Maurice Kogan, who served in our U.S. Department of Commerce office as our Director of Market Research. Also today, we've got Mark Matsumoto with CBEC Asia, cross-border e-commerce Asia. Mark was here in previous sessions. He's going to go over pricing, distribution, how to adapt to the foreign cultures and the regulations, kind of the role of agents and distributors, and also to find and vet agents and distributors. Mark, if you recall, along with my colleague, James Bledsoe, had a great session last week with e-commerce and cross-border e-commerce. It was awesome. And, the third-party logistics is a big part of this as well for fulfillment. So I'm sure Mark will get in that. Lastly, though, we've got a great cleanup speaker today, so to speak. We've got David Habib of Habib Law. David is a great friend and colleague to the international trade community, former president of the World Trade Center Association up in Oxnard, California, back in the day. He has been the chair of our Southern California District Export Council, and someone I've worked with and cherish his sage wisdom when it comes to the legal aspects of developing and entering markets, especially with regards to agent and distributor agreements. So hold on to that one. You might want to take personal notes on that one too, not just rely on AI. So just kicking it off today. I think you can see my opening slide here. Try to see. There we go. There I am. Let's see. All right. So today's focus is finding and entering markets. That's what we love to do at the U.S. Commercial Service. Just to remind you, slide at the end with all of our federal partners, but we've got some of our federal partners and we've got some of the clients we've worked with. I noticed Paul Smith from the Small Business Administration is here. Paul and I have worked together in many aspects over the last 25 years. I also noticed Kathy Million is back from UVDI. Kathy, chime in. You've used many of our services over the years successfully too. And anybody else, please drop something in the chat box. I'll monitor that for the morning. If you need to take a bio break or anything like that, feel free to do so. I got my cup of coffee here. I'm ready to go, I think. So, is your company ready to go global? Maurice is going to get into this too. He's an expert at this. But I just wanted to kick this off with assessing your export readiness. Are you currently selling in the U.S.? Maybe not. Maybe you're already selling in Mexico. Maybe you're selling in Canada. 40% of our trade is with our U.S., Mexico, Canadian agreement partners. So there's a good chance you're doing that. Is your whole team committed and ready for exporting? That's important too. I know some of our clients we've worked with over the years will work with, a sales representative or a marketing representative who received some sort of inquiry, maybe through their website or maybe at a trade show or at a trade event someplace, and you follow up on it. Make sure you've got the support and the backing of your upper management and your team, it's kind of a holistic approach going forward in the global market, and you want that global team in place. Resources dedicated, yes. We're lucky here because I really think Southern California is the global trade capital of California, if not the United States, if not the world. We have the best infrastructure with the ports. We've even got the best small ports in California. We've got the Port of Hueneme up there in Ventura County. We've got San Diego down in San Diego. We've got the behemoths, Long Beach and LA right here. But we also have LAX, and we've got a slew of regional exports here, all the way from North County, LA, all the way down to South County and Orange County, and out east towards Ontario and the Inland Empire. Want to give a shout out to my colleagues in Los Angeles. Leticia Arias is the acting director for Los Angeles. Amy Magad is in downtown LA, and our office co-located with the Los Angeles Economic Development Corporation. I'm down in Irvine with my colleagues. I'm co-located, interestingly enough, with the Export Enforcement Division of Commerce and our Bureau of Industry and Security, who counsels and advises companies on export regs and export compliance licensing, which is really important when you get to the high-tech items and the defense and aerospace items. How about your production capacity? That's real important too. It's not just about a product too. I would say the fastest growing, Maurice, you can correct me on this later, but one of the fastest growing aspects of global trade is definitely in the services sector. It's an area that's growing fast. A lot of business can be done through cross-border e-commerce. Mark Matsumoto will tell you about that. In fact, he's doing a program exclusively on the export of services on June 17th down in Orange County at the University of California Innovation Lab. He'll say a little bit more about that too, if you're in the service sector. And lastly, and not leastly, the financial resources are in place to actively help you market your products and your services overseas. Luckily, you've heard early on, I think in the first session, session one, you heard from Paul Duncan with the U.S. Export-Import Bank. You also heard from Martin Sealander with SBA. And today, I think Paul Smith, you're out there, so chime in on the financing front. Financing is key. I think just to remind you, when you've got the financing in place, we had a conversation with a company yesterday, and they were saying how, and they were in the apparel sector, and how they had a deal around $100,000, and the company had to back out for some reason. And it took them a year to dispense with that inventory, and they either broke even or maybe less or a little loss. But if they had had a credit insurance policy with the U.S. Export-Import Bank, they may have avoided that loss. They may have been able to file a claim and recover 95% of the value of that invoice. Not a bad deal with XM Bank. And having the working capital financing and having an international trade loan with SBA gives you a lot of local and working capital development resources as well. So you'll tap into those, I'm sure. So what's the best approach? Are you a small firm? Probably. Do you have a propensity for risk aversion? Hopefully. You've got the resources here. This RETAP program is awesome. The speakers and all the resources here are here for you 24/7, just about. The nature of your products and services, previous export experience, and sort of the business conditions. Today, the times are changing and there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of talk about tariffs too. I'm not going to get into that, but there's plenty of information out there to keep you focused and as up to date as possible. Now, the first step really in really, finding and entering your best market, I feel is just doing a quick canvas of your market intelligence. And whether you've got AI, whether you use, Google Gemini or ChatGPT or any of these other AI tools, They're great. They'll scrape the internet and they'll put it through an algorithm and it'll come out and you'll be able to find a lot of good information. But take the sources you know. So you know us. We're sort of the speakers and sort of the content of the RETAP program, the RETAP series. So come to us, talk to us, and we can point you in the right direction. But a lot of this is very self-accessible. So in terms of market research, one of the first go-tos is sort of our country commercial guide here. Um, and we also have something called an initial market check and a customized market research program. And we have a background check with a company profile. The country commercial guide is usually put out every year or two. It's posted on all of our trade.gov foreign office websites. So again, I think I mentioned this before, as sort of your GPS for trade, at least in terms of the U.S. Department of Commerce. All you need to do sometimes is just put trade.gov into Google and use a little space and type in market research, type in country commercial guides, type in, you can even abbreviate ICP and the International Company Profile Background Check Service will come up. So, yeah. So all of these are great for initial market intelligence on your product. We have a lot of good connections. I think, the best thing for us, the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service, is the combination of both the U.S. side and the FCS. And this is our logo. Wherever you see this, this means we're working together. So my colleagues are overseas in the U.S. embassies and consulates. Our domestic team, are here in LA, Southern California, all over the United States. And we have our industry specialists and our compliance and regulatory folks in commerce. And our overall agency is the International Trade Administration. That is the bureau within commerce that its sole function is on developing exports to generate revenue, new sources of revenue outside of the United States being repatriated back into the United States. Another function, which is fast becoming in the last 15 years, extremely exciting, is foreign direct investment. And you'll see that all around. In fact, foreign direct investment, if you think of Honda America in Torrance, California, that's a good example of foreign direct investment. In fact, back in the mid 90s, we were allowed to work with them to help them find potential markets in Latin America because the Civics and the Accords were assembled here in the United States. And so FDI can become U.S. exports depending on the 51% U.S. content and labor. And in many cases, that's the case. We have in-country experts. In fact, I was online with some folks last night. I was trying to, you have to work on all hours of the night. You're going to get used to that as you guys start to develop and enter markets. So last night, I was trying to catch our folks in the Middle East with, I've got an agricultural-based food and beverage company here in Los Angeles. That's one of the industries I cover. And they were targeting the Middle East. They had 5 contacts they had acquired. They wanted to find some intelligence on their background, these 5 companies. And so I reached out to our offices in Dubai and had a great conversation with both our American commercial officer, but also with, because it's ag products, we also have another agency overseas, in-country experts. That's our Foreign Agricultural Service. They're part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So depending on the product, sometimes there's another agency there to help you as well. And in that case, we all can be a liaison for you in that sector. Food and beverage, by the way, is huge in LA. It's pretty big in Orange County and San Diego as well, but it's huge in LA. Lots of great potential with lots of great brands, lots of great company connections. We're the breadbasket of California, just south of the Central Valley. So great access to supplies and products there. And networking and looking at competitors' websites. That's another thing we like to do. So use the market research. I think, Maurice, you're going to get into this heavily, which is awesome. But I'll show you some sample market research items we have for sure. Um, you know, we always think 2 to 3 markets. When somebody approaches us, and they say, I want to export to China, I'm like, oh my gosh, China's a huge market. Geographically, it's the size of the United States. Market size, population size, it's 3, 4 times the size of the United States. It's a big market. So let us help you, identify maybe a provincial market within China, perhaps even maybe a municipal market like Shanghai or Beijing or Hong Kong or something like that. But we can help you do that. The other thing is we've always had this question about primary and secondary research. Maurice is probably going to get into that, but primary research is great. It's direct feedback, focus groups, direct observation, things of that nature. Secondary research is the stuff you might find on the internet off the shelf, AI driven as well. But there are ways to do cost effective primary research firsthand. And some of the programs and services that we offer, especially the initial market check, the IMC, where we basically survey up to 5 companies and we ask them to review your product or your service. And they in turn give you feedback and sort of a first right of refusal to be in touch with you. And then after that, we can either set up an official, what we call a gold key B2B meeting, or we can do just a virtual introduction for you so that you can just connect with them directly. I'm finding this IMC virtual introduction trend very, very popular these days. It's a quick 1-2 punch into the foreign market, and it can get you the information. Doesn't go so far to the extent of doing a full international company profile, a background check. It doesn't go as far as our folks going out there in the market, meeting, providing translation services for you. But in a way, it's a very expeditious way of getting market intelligence and some of the time primary, which can be costly at times. So we have a great resource. This is a good resource for you to start off with. I'm sure, Maurice, you're gonna tap into this, but again, it's based off of our trade.gov portal. It's our Trade Stats Express National Estate Trade Data. So if you want to know what's being exported outside of maybe California, you can find that out. If you want to know what's being exported in general in terms of the United States, which is a great indicator, you can find that out as well. But I like this one. This service to me is really something. Let's see if I can get this to work here. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try a live demo here if we can. We're going to see if this comes up. Sonny, do you see this? Can you tell me if you see this screen?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, great. I'm just using you because you're online here. Thanks.
I'm at your service.
Okay, great. Awesome. I'm going to need it. All right. So this market diversification tool, we've had this around for a while, but I like it. It's quick. It's easy. Something just to go to, Sonny, I'll use you as an example. What kind of exporter are you?
So our current largest deal is LNG. You mentioned China. So yes.
Okay. All right.
And a specific province and a specific company. Yes, not the entire China.
Okay, I'm gonna say you're already exporting.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm also, let's see here. But let's change this up. I'm gonna say you are exporting. You're diversifying, Sonny. Energy's great, and that's going to be a big focus of our administration, I think. And LNG and traditional, energy, even nuclear is sort of coming back. I know that there's a lot of opportunities going on in Europe, but in the United States, there's a lot of talk about nuclear as well. But let's do this. let's say you and I are in business and we're exporting cosmetics. Is that okay for just this example?
Sounds good.
So let's see here. I will put this in here. I think we have done this so many times with so many companies in Southern California. I think this will come up. See if we can get somewhere here. Let's see, maybe
Excuse me.
yeah, go ahead. Are you Claudia?
Yes, yes. Hi, good morning. So we can only see your PowerPoint slides. I don't know if you're trying to show the website.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get it.
Okay.
I get it.
Thanks.
So let's let's try this. Give me a second here. I'm gonna go and share again. Is that okay? Give me 1 second here. I think Claudia, tell me if you can see this.
Slides.
Yeah, the PowerPoint slides
Okay, great.
or
Can
the
you see it
slides.
again? Okay, let's see. 3420. Okay. What is that? Red. Okay, beauty. Okay, that's a beauty product. Okay, we've got our cosmetic product. Okay, hypothyroid. Claudia, you can stay on and help us with this.
Rich,
Um,
are you sharing your browser or your slides? Because
I am sharing my browser now. I'll go back
we
to my
see
Yeah.
slides.
slides.
Yeah, these are the slides.
Oh, really? Okay, so you still can't see my browser. All right, let's see. A sec. Okay.
I would unshare your screen and then reshare it again just make it easier.
Let's see if we can do this. That's okay. No, that's not it. Okay, one more time. That's, can you see my browser?
Slides.
Slides again. Okay. All right, one more try here. Sorry, guys. Just give me a sec. And you, one more time.
Tenth time the charm.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Claudia. Thanks, Sonny. Thanks, everyone. All right, so there's our cosmetic product, okay? 3304. I'll do this one. Beauty products, right? So we got that. Let's just do all markets, okay? I don't want to really limit the results. Let me see. Maybe just 10. Is that okay? There we go. I'm not going to change the weights here. Let's just go to the results and see what we get here. Give it a sec. All right. So it comes back with all of these indicators and it gives you a quick top 10 snapshot. Now for cosmetics, Claudia or Sani, help me out here, but Canada, Germany, even China. We did a last February in 23. We did an awesome program. We did a beauty showcase with 25 cosmetic companies, 15 of which were from California. And we used influencers that were set up by our U.S. commercial service offices in Beijing, in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and it went over really well. We've had a number of successes with these companies in the market. And, if you've ever gone to an outlet store, maybe off of Highway 10, the Cabazon outlets on your way to Palm Springs, you might come across some tourists who are doing some video posts. Folks are very good at that these days. So take a look at some of these markets: Canada, Germany, China. Canada looks the most kind of active here. So that's something we can look at. And you've got it all the way down to France, Spain. We've got trade agreements with Mexico, Australia, Canada. So these are good. These are good markets. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to go back to my screen. Let's see here. All right. So are we back to?
You are.
You guys see? Okay, great. Back to my screen. Okay, so some of the market research tools we use. If you're not familiar, you don't have subscriptions to some of these, LexisNexis, BNA. We have a Commerce Research Library subscription that we use. It's great. It's an opportunity for us to tap into those resources. And I am a big fan of our proximity to trade events here to gain a lot of good primary research from foreign delegations that come to our trade shows. So, for example, we had a Hydrogen Expo show at the Long Beach Convention Center back in mid-January. We've had Natural Products Expo West, which is the largest kind of consumer-driven nutritional supplement natural products show in Anaheim just recently, the last couple of weeks. We had foreign delegations that were there. Great opportunity for you to connect with those companies and get real-time market research. In fact, Mark Matsumoto, who will speak later, was at that trade show as well. You can talk about just the direct contact there is with foreign companies. You've got a great trade show center right here in Anaheim, Los Angeles Convention Center, San Diego Convention Center. The behemoth, of course, is Las Vegas. In fact, for us, for the environmental tech sector, we have a big show coming up with a lot of delegations coming to it. It's called Waste Expo. It's in Las Vegas in early May. I would say too that our business matchmaking services are a great way for you to gain feedback and understanding of the market. And some of these we can tailor virtually, but I would say when you're trying to introduce a product into a market, our single company promotion allows you to work with our overseas offices to invite the right type of contacts and potential partners for you to showcase your product on stage or in front of a podium in a PowerPoint, in a room, in a hotel room, maybe an embassy facility, and be able to connect that way. We have an international partner search that can allow you to do it virtually or in person. And I like these online services we have too. It's not Amazon or it's not Instagram, but our featured U.S. export listing allows you as an exporter to be a part and affiliated with our trade.gov website overseas. And I think having that secondary .gov connection, James brought this up last week, if you recall, it's having a back reference to a .gov website. So it's not just the case of you putting trade.gov as a reference on your website, but it's you being listed on maybe one of our websites overseas, depending on what that market is. And that user fee is very small. If you're a service provider, and I know we have some service providers here, We also have this business service provider listing here on the domestic side. So the FUSE program for exporters is on our overseas trade.gov website listings, and the business service provider listing is here on our trade.gov websites. So any service providers out there, let me know. I'll talk to maybe Habib Law, David Habib later about that. But having a legal service, having a logistics service, having a finance service, have a consulting service would be good to maybe be a part of our business service provider listing. So this is my colleague and I, Leticia Arias. These are also some of our federal partners that we work with. Again, we're co-located with our Export Compliance Division in Irvine. We also have a great connection with the Small Business Administration. There's an LA district office right here. Julie Close is the district director. I think Christopher is the acting director, Paul, down in Irvine. And we have a district office for SBA down in San Diego as well. Paul is part of the Export-Import Bank here. Sandra Donzella is down in San Diego. And what I like is we have Lena Dacker, who is part of our advocacy office. Advocacy is something you may need. If you're involved with a foreign government tender, a lot of times that requires government-to-government discussions and applications, and you want to compete against maybe some other countries. That's where Lena and her team can come in when you're competing for a tender against maybe other foreign markets. So that is pretty much it. And I believe I have maybe one more minute. I don't know. Do we have any questions inside the chat box? You see anything here?
Good morning, everyone. Did you say a expo was going to be in Las Vegas?
I did. Is this yes, I did. If you're in the solid or water waste treatment industry, Waste Expo is the place to be.
The reason
And
why I asked you is because I'm looking for sustainable packaging for my product.
that could
So,
be there.
oh,
Absolutely. Now,
okay,
there's
good.
another show that I think would be more substantial for you. That's Pac West Expo.
Okay,
That's in Vegas as well. I can find out let me find out the dates on that, and I'll let
okay.
you know.
Thank you.
I didn't get a chance to show you our country commercial guides, but what I would do in the cosmetics sector again, if we use that example, Sonny, is I would go to the country commercial guide for, Canada, for example. I'd just go trade.gov, space Canada, CCG, and boom, you'll get right to it. And I would like to see what the best prospects are. And they always have a best prospects section in the country commercial guide. And I would see if there was a consumer goods oriented best prospects to validate that. And then I would take a look at the potential trade shows out there. I know there's three cosmetic related shows, and there's beauty shows too as well. But there's Cosmoprof Asia in Hong Kong. There's Cosmoprof Italy in Bologna, Italy, and then there's Cosmoprof Las Vegas, which is right around the corner for you. So all three of those would be great entrees, and we usually do USA pavilions. And remember, the SBA STEP grant, the State Trade Expansion Program, which Simona and Paul and everyone are experts at delivering, is organized and coordinated by the California Office of Economic Development, the governor's office, GoBiz. And you should always, and I think they're in their last round for this year. So if you just Google, CA space STEP, you can get to the program and see they're in the third round. So if you haven't applied for an export voucher or one of their programs, you can. Back to you, Sonny. Back to your energy. I see your hand. Go ahead. You'll finish this off with the last question.
So my question is, you listed some of the really interesting services earlier, advocacy for tenders from foreign governments, for example, or promotion in the foreign markets. Is there any fee for those services, or are they covered by the taxpayer money?
There's a small user fee. Congress mandates that when we begin to work specifically with one company, uh, the company has sort of a user fee that's attached to it. It's very small. So for the initial market check, for example, getting those 5 companies to give you feedback and your option to maybe follow up with them, that's only $350. In many ways, that's very nominal, but it's also reimbursable. So the export voucher program can help you with that. If you guys don't know Mariana Guevara, she works for the state of California. She works with GoBiz. She is the manager of that program, and she is awesome. So if you're ready to tap into, you're tapping into RETAP and now you're tapping into STEP, reach out to her and let her know that you heard something through the RETAP program. Now back to you, Sani. You mentioned energy, and we talked about Canada. I'll leave it on this. We have a great program, the Global Energy Show in Calgary. It's in early June. We're going to have a USA pavilion. There's also going to be a California pavilion. So Diana Dominguez from the governor's office is running that. So, and you can get funded for that through STEP. So it's one of their signature events that they're offsetting. I don't know what the offset is, but usually the state of California wants you to have some buy-in. They want you to have at least 25%. And so it's 75% off of whatever that USA Pavilion booth share is. Usually maybe that's a 3x3 meter booth or a 1x3 meter booth. That's usually, 10x10 or 5x10. So take a look at that from the energy sector. I didn't want to leave you hanging there. So,
I will. Thank you. That sounds interesting.
Hey,
all right.
quick question, Rich. I know you
go
gotta
for it.
go.
No,
I know you gotta
go
go,
for it.
but did you see my question in the chat or?
No. Let me see here. I'm sorry.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, I didn't scroll down.
No worries. I can just repeat it. It's in the case I have a yoga therapy service that is securing government contracts.
Okay.
What service and consultation would I be able to lean into to expand my teaching and services globally? Because I'd like to facilitate for organizations like the U.S. Commercial Service and at expos.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we do have companies that export to U.S. embassies and consulates.
That's what I would like to do.
There might even be a military option for
That's
you.
what I'm doing currently.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
can I email you personally just to
Oh
go
yeah,
deep on that?
absolutely.
All right, cool.
Absolutely. I
Thank
love
you.
it. You do that. I'll be here through the day, so I'll be
Copy.
here through
Thank
the
you.
rest of the program. And I'll try to give you some information in the chat as well.
Could I mention, Maurice, I want to mention that since you're talking about fees, many of the programs that Richard talked about, whether Gold Key, International Partner Search, a single company promotion, they all have fees. However, under RETAP, if you are working with Simona as a level 201, we cover all those fees. So you don't have to pay any of those fees.
Yes.
That's
Great
the
job, Maurice.
advantage. So,
Great comment. Yep. I mentioned that in the first session, but just to remind you, yes, this is the unique program of RETAP. It has a substantial amount to offset. So if you're qualified as a 201, make sure you've registered the form, and Simona and Maurice can cover that. They usually share with me that information, and we'll plug you in. I think we got like already 10, 12 companies ready to go. So we're going to be working on plugging them into these user fee services and activating their entry very soon. Okay, that's it. I'm sorry, maybe gone over a little bit, Maurice, but I think it's your session now. This is all about how to identify your best export markets. Maurice, I think I'm not sharing my screen anymore, so feel free to put your slides back on. And Sandra, I'll leave it over to you guys. Thanks, everyone. I'll be here out throughout the morning, and I'll monitor the chat. So thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you. This is Maurice again. I want you to take a brief break because we're not sure whether we have the right PowerPoint for you for my presentation. If we don't have the right one, I have another one, but I want to see if we can find the right one. So if you could hold off for another 5 minutes and come back in, I will know the answer to that question.
Good morning, Maurice. Can I ask you a question while we take a break?
Sure, go for it.
I wanted to ask you.
And Keisha, we'll circle back with that too. Maurice, you're all set. I'll go off screen. It's all yours how to identify the best markets. You guys take notes. Maurice, over to you.
Thank you. Okay. Richard gave you some programs that Commerce offers that help you, identify best markets like the market identification tool. But if you didn't have those tools and you were just sitting here and say, hey, I make product X, where should I be exporting it to? And you didn't know about those things, what is the methodology you would use to try to identify which markets might be better than others for your particular product? So for the moment, forget what Richard said, all the shortcuts to answer that question. Put on your thinking cap and let's see if we can go through a thought process, really, to come up with those best markets for any given product. The first thing is to figure out what kind of market identification you're looking for. For example, if you're doing e-commerce and you have a global strategy, you're not talking about target markets. You're talking about any market, anybody around the world that reacts to your website and contacts you, and you do business with them. That's a global strategy. It's open to all markets. Let's stick with that. But if you decide for some reason, and I think it's usually a good reason, that you want to try to figure out which markets might be particularly best for my product or for me as a company, you would begin to think about a targeting process. And there are two types of markets you might want to consider. One I call a high comfort market, and the others are high potential markets. Now, I mentioned this in an earlier session. A high comfort market would be a market that you're very familiar with personally. You may have come from that country. You know how to do business in a country like that. You have connections in those countries. You know the regulations, you know the culture. And so even though it may not be the highest potential market for sales, you could do well in it because you're familiar with it. You don't have to learn a lot of new tricks. And so if that's your mindset, that's perfectly all right. You can start there. You can get to know how to do things from an export point of view in a market you're familiar with, and then apply those skills to look for the other types of markets, the higher potential markets. What I'm going to be talking about mostly is, well, how do you find those high potential markets without the tools that Richard mentioned? And basically what you're talking about there is in my opinion, trade statistics. But let's say another option is, well, I want to do both. I want to be open to everybody, but I also want to find some target markets, and I call that maybe a hybrid strategy, where you combine both. Now, something happens when you're doing both in a particular country. So if you appoint a distributor in a particular country that you've identified as high potential, but you're also open to business through e-commerce, the distributor might say, hey, they're going around me. They can get to you through the e-commerce, but I want them to come to me as your distributor. And we call that channel conflict. And so what you want to do, if you want to do a hybrid, that's okay, but you need to work out with your distributor, how to make sure that for the e-commerce done in that country, it's sent through your distributor, so they're not competing. Okay, next slide. My opinion is you can identify best markets almost entirely through statistical analysis. Now, some people don't agree with that, but I find that it works when you apply this process that I'm going to go through with you today. Now, if you're going to do any statistical analysis of exports for your product, you have to start with what your product code number is, because all the statistics are based on a product code number. And the first code number you might confront is what we call a Schedule B number. Schedule B number, every product exported from the United States, when you file your document to ship it, you have to put on there what the Schedule B number is. And you can find your Schedule B number by linking to that Schedule B lookup. I've given you both the click capability and the URL for it. When you click on that, you'll get to the U.S. Customs Bureau site that has all the Schedule B numbers. So you scroll down, you can use a keyword, and it will tell you pretty much what your Schedule B number is. To be more specific, you want at least a 6-digit number. Schedule B goes up to 10 digits. The first 6 digits of Schedule B are harmonized around the world, so we call that a harmonized code. And so if you just want the harmonized code, instead of going through the Schedule B lookup, you can go directly to a harmonized code lookup, which is linked here as well. And you can put in a keyword, or you can scroll down by the numbers. The important thing is you need to come up with a number for your product, a code number for your product. Now, once you have the code number for the product, you can go into several sources where you can pull up trade statistics for that product by its number. One of them is the International Trade Commission Trade Data Web. This is a free source. It's linked here. And the other one is ITA, International Trade Administration, the Commerce Department's Trade Stats Express. That's also linked here. When you click on either of those, what you will get is the opportunity to plug in your number, your Schedule B number or harmonized code number, and it will pull up the statistics for U.S. exports of that product. And once you get the U.S. export statistics, and I'll go into this in more detail, how you can use them, you also want to find out what other countries are importing of that same product. And for the international trade statistics, which countries are importing the same product, you would go to this other source called the United Nations. It's an International Trade Center or IntraCen website, where you can pull up the foreign import statistics by its code number, by its harmonized code number. Next slide, please. Now, what you want to eventually do is create what I call a target market matrix using these statistics that you pull up. And this is what a target market matrix might look like. I have 7 columns here, and the countries are down the vertical. And the first thing you're looking for is from the U.S. export statistics, which were the largest export destinations for my product in the latest year. And you can get 2024 data right now. And I'm going to go through some tables that I pulled up that show you exactly what I'm talking about. But right now I'm trying to explain this matrix. So you go into the U.S. export statistics and for your product number, and it will show, let's say the top 25 or the top 10 or the top 30, however you can cut that off. And it will show which countries that product was exported to, let's say over the past 4 years. And you can download that to an Excel spreadsheet, and you can do say, well, what was the increase from the 4 years ago to the current year? And what was the increase from the last year to the current year? That's what you want to do when you get these statistics. And when you see that these countries were the largest destinations for the export of the product, number one. And when you see a country in, let's say, the top 5, for this purpose, I would put a double X. A double X in that column means it really met that criterion very well. You see country 3 got a double X in column 1. Why? Because it was among the top, let's say, the top 5 export destinations for the product. A single X might be maybe from 6 to 10 top destinations. A blank means it didn't really amount to very much and you don't want to worry about that. Okay, so now you have in column 1 which ones really met the criterion for the largest export destinations in 2024. Well, what happens if you look on what happened in the previous years and you find out that the 24 number was very high, but it was way down from what it was 4 years ago. So it's a downward trend. That's not good. So what you're looking for here is which ones were not only the top destinations, but also the fastest growing destinations. So if the product exported was 100 million in 2021, and it went up to 500 million in 2024, that's a growth rate. So you would indicate that a very fast growing over the past 4 years would get 2 X's, as in country 2 there for, well, that's for column 5. The country 1 got a 2 X's for the fastest growing export destinations. Well, what happens if it went from 100 million to 400 million in the 4 years, but what did it do in the latest year? Did it continue to grow or did it go down? Well, if it continued to grow, that's what we're looking at here. So in the column 3, it says not only was it a large export destination and a fast growing over the past 4 years, but it also continued to grow in the latest year. That's column 3. So now we've looked at U.S. export statistics from the best point of view of a product. It was a very large destination. These were the countries where it was a large destination. These were the countries where it was a fast growing destination. And these are the countries where it continued to grow in the latest year. That's what we've captured in the first 3 rows there. Well, it's not good enough to know how U.S. exports did. That's fine. Sorry, go back. But we also want to know, well, how did it do in the importing countries? I mean, we could have a product that did gangbusters on the U.S. export side and wound up being going from 100 million to 400 million in a particular country over the past 4 years. But what if that 400 million imported into China or Japan or whatever was only 1% of what Japan actually imported of that product? And so even though it looked good from a U.S. export point of view, in context of the country's imports, it was negligible. So we don't want to stop with just the U.S. export side. We want to also look at which countries were also leading and fast growing and continue to fast grow imports of the same product from the U.S. So that's what we're doing in line 4, which were also the largest importing countries in the latest year. And for that, you go to the UN statistics. You're out of the U.S. statistics and you're now into the UN statistics. So which countries were the leading importers of my product? Which countries were the fastest growing importers of my product? And scroll down one more. Which countries continue to import no, back to, does it go any lower?
No.
Oh. We're continuing fast growth in the importing country.
So you want to go to that spreadsheet?
Not yet, this is okay. So the item 7, which isn't showing here, would then look at the market share. And you would look at, there you would also look at the international figures of world exporters of the same item. And you would see where the US ranked as a world exporter of your product. And if the US was among the top 5 world exporters of your product, in addition to all those other favorable factors, and they're showing up on this matrix with lots of double X's and single X's, those are the countries that stand out when you look at each of those criteria. And as a result, you see country 1 and country 3 met the criteria best when you looked at all the criteria. That might be a little hard to gauge from just this alone, so you'd have to play with it a little bit. You can go to the next slide. So how do you come up with these findings? Once you get the Schedule B or HS code, and you go to the U.S. export statistics, you run the tables. So you look for the U.S. exports of product X, the top, show me the top 25 countries. What were the 10 leading ones over the past 3 or 4 years? Now I have and highlighted. And is a condition. So the idea of this matrix is every one of those criteria has to be met. Not only was this a top leading destination for my product over the past 3 years, but it also was among the top fastest growing destinations over the past 3 years. Not only that, but also it continued its export growth in the latest year. And not only that, and from an import point of view, world import point of view, it was among the top leading importing countries. And it also was the top 10 fast growing importing country of my product, and continued to grow in the latest year. And the US market share was 10% or more. Okay, if you grasp that, you can go to the next slide. If all the and conditions are met, it not only did this, and it did that, and it did that, and it did that, and it did that, it follows, in my opinion, that US exports of your product doing gangbusters statistically means it was not impeded by other counteracting factors. Sometimes you look at econometric models, complicated models, and it takes into account GDP, it takes into account trade regulations, import barriers, tariffs, et cetera, et cetera. But guess what? If the statistics show that this product did gangbusters in all of those other respects, what that really means is that the market is good, that incomes and purchasing power are favorable, that there are plenty of users there, that the competition is tolerable in those countries, that the physical climates and local cultures are receptive to the product, and there are no meaningful tariff or non-tariff barriers. Why? Because otherwise, that country would not have survived the 7 and conditions. Okay, that's my contention, is my theory, and I use that in analyzing what I think are the best markets for any client's products. I do this matrix, and then I also do something called an export market brief, where we use that data to fill in some blanks in one page. And what we're going to do for the companies that we consider Export 101 for RETAP, those are companies that are new to export, not the ones that are in the 201 area that already are. They already know what their best markets are. The 201 countries don't have to figure that out. They already know, and Simona will be working with those 201 countries to get them into those markets. Whereas I will be working with the companies in 101, Export 101, where we need to figure out which countries do make the most sense and to help you get into those markets. Once you gravitate from me to get you set up in which markets you ought to be focused on. And you've gone through all the training, and we consider that you're ready to implement what Simona can do for you and what the Commerce Department programs can do for you. Then you shift over, and that's where you're entitled to all the fee waivers. And those fees, can vary from I don't know what, maybe $100 or something for the website globalization review to maybe $700 for an international partner search, and maybe $1,200 for customized market research. We cover all those fees with RETAP. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. All right, so if you're not quite a believer in my method, in my theory of then you can do what use other methods to verify the findings. So what other ways can you go about finding what the markets are best? Richard mentioned primary research. Basically, primary research is on the ground. When Richard talked about the market introduction tool, he's talking about our officers in the embassies and consulates going out and talking to people on the ground. What do you think if this is a promising market? Or if you were to take a trip there yourself and look around and ask a bunch of questions, that's primary research. You're figuring out what's going on in that country that's good for you, where you can really make an impact. But not everybody can afford primary research. And so you revert to other things that you can do, and there's a heck of a lot of free information out there. For example, Richard mentioned the country commercial guides. These, by the way, these are all linkable. When you get this for yourself, you can click on these links. The country commercial guides, as Richard mentioned, one of the chapters in that guide says what do we think the best prospects are, target industries are in that country. Now that's not a product, that's an industry. So it might say medical equipment. Well, that doesn't mean that your particular electrocardiograph is promising, but it does say that medical equipment in general is promising in that market as identified in the country commercial guide in one of the chapters. So that's you can look for the best prospects in that chapter of the country commercial guide. You can also, in other chapters of the country commercial guide, see a chapter on doing business in that country, and that'll get into the cultural aspects and the business practices and other ways to do business in the country. So those guides are very useful from a country point of view, not necessarily from a product point of view. What you're really looking for, if you can, is there any free information on the internet that is specific to industries or products? And yes, the trade.gov, the Commerce Department's website, does have areas where you can pull up industry-specific reports and product-specific reports. And so you would certainly want to, you don't want to, just go by the country level. You want to see for medical equipment as an industry, what are the most promising markets? Or for, I don't think we do energy, liquid, natural gas. I don't think we find that too much in the country commercial guides, but there are a lot of other products that are where there are specific reports. Market for product X in Saudi Arabia. Years ago, I used to run the market research division in the Commerce Department, International Market Research, and we had a lot more of those reports back then, but for some reason, the budgets and other factors have cut it back. So there's still stuff there. If you click on these links, you will see areas on the trade.gov site that point to specific product reports, research. And then there is the customized market research. Customized market research says, well, let's take a look at your particular product. Not product X, but your product X. And let's see what the market's conditions are, the best markets, and how to get into them for your particular product. That's it. Whether it's it could be lipstick, or maybe it even is the red lipstick instead of purple lipstick, you know. And whatever the product level you want, if that's what you make, that's what you're ordering. You're asking for research on that particular product of yours. And the Commerce Department has a customized market research program that I created back in the 1980s when I was in the Commerce Department, because I said to myself, hey, we got a lot of other research, but what about product X? We don't have anything for product X. Why don't we come up with a service like that? So we actually brought in Foreign Service nationals from about 15 different overseas posts and trained them for 3 weeks in Washington on how to do customized market research. That program survived after all these years. And there it is, the USTOC customized research, where for your particular product, it goes into 6 or 7 or 8 different questions about it, and you get that report. We have an alternative to that, that Dr. Sarita Jackson does. So any of the companies that gravitate up from 101, where I'm helping you get ready to export, once you're in a position where you're ready to export and you become level 201, Dr. Jackson will work with you individually. And I think some of you on this line probably are already, is anybody on the line already working with Dr. Jackson? Is anybody on the line?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, we're here.
I am, Sonny.
Okay, Sonny is, I think, Kathy, are you there?
I'm here, Maurice.
Have you gotten in touch with Dr. Jackson, Sarita, for market research? Oh, maybe
Who
not.
are you asking?
I'm asking you now.
Oh, no, I haven't.
Okay.
Yeah, the reason why I hadn't is because I wanted to focus more on export management. So I didn't see if I didn't think that I needed to, but now I have an idea for a product that I do want to export. So I will meet with her.
All right, I may have confused you with somebody else. I think somebody on this line has already been turned over to
I have. This is Claire Ananias. I've had my conversation with Sarita already, which was great.
Okay.
Maurice, this is Kathy. I finally got the unmute to work. So yeah, I'm also in conversations with Sarita as well.
So that's a very important.
Hey, Maurice, this is Paul Smith with SBA. I've worked with Sarita for a number of years, not only in new to export programs, but in market research. And I was with her in Cuba. She really is a very high level professional. So whoever chooses to work with her, I think is going to be very pleased. Thanks.
Yeah, now this is normally like a $1,200 value, this particular customized market research. So that's what you're getting under RETAP when you get to the point where you're finished with me at 101 and you're ready to move to Simona at level 201. And the first thing we have you do is have Sarita Jackson do a customized market research job for you, which also includes, I believe, very importantly, an export market plan. It's not just which markets are best, but having identified those markets, what's the best way to get into those markets? And I think Mark Matsumoto is going to cover that topic after me in more detail about market entry planning, and but her report also covers that. And next slide. So if you were doing your own market research, whether you use just statistics or much of the other tremendous amount of information on the internet and trade.gov and elsewhere, you're looking for what is the demand for your product in the target segments. If you make consumer goods, what are you going to look for? Well, you can look for data on users of those consumer goods. Maybe you sell to a community of males or females, female wearing apparel, or you sell to children, products for children, or you sell products of particularly high income, or you sell health related products. There is a lot of demographic information, free information. You can get it off my website. Just look in there. It's a UN data and other data that has lots of demographics that tell you how many of a particular gender or a particular age are in those countries that you targeted. What kinds of diseases are there? What's the mortality rate for particular diseases? You can get all kinds of information on the for the consumer goods. For medical products, you would be looking for medical facilities that would use those products, whether it's hospitals directly that you could approach, or whether it's physicians within the country. In some countries, where you sell medical equipment, I've run across this. If you go to the procurement department of that hospital, then try to make contact with them, they may not be interested. But if you happen to know a physician within that hospital that can lobby for you, that may be where you want to target your efforts. If you make machinery and materials, obviously it would be for this industry or that industry. You would look for the demographics and statistics on how many of those industries there are, how many manufacturers of this are there, of that. All of that information is available. For construction equipment, you're looking at infrastructure projects. Who's building ports? Who's paving roads? Who's doing this or that or the other? All of that information is accessible to you if you know how to look. And a lot of it you can get off my particular website, which goes well beyond trade.gov, because trade.gov just basically covers Commerce Department information, whereas my International Trade Compliance Institute website includes not only that, but every other agency's trade information, plus international UN information, all in one place. Market practices, if you're going to go into a target market, you need to know what the cultural do's and don'ts are, what the business customs are. Mark will probably get into that in more detail. And also market access. You've got to take a look at the barriers. Now, people may think that these are non-starters, these barriers, but they're not. Most countries, the tariffs are tolerable, and non-tariff barriers are just like we have here in normal times. Sometimes they're protectionist, but in many cases they're not to protect domestic industries, but they are more to safeguard the health of the population in the country, so that you can't send unhealthy or unsafe products. And all you need is a permit of some sort from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration or other agency that says this product is basically safe, because it's the same product we sell in the U.S. So those are the things I wanted to cover in particular about how to identify target markets. And Mark will get into more detail about once you've identified one, how do you make the most of it. So I'm going to stop here. There's time for questions if anybody has them. All right, no questions. I think we can take a break. we've scheduled a break anyway, so we can do that. And I mentioned that when you go to these websites to pull up the statistics, this is an example of a table that will be generated right there for you. And this one is shows the top markets in rank order. I believe in rank order by value in 2024. So you see Canada was number one with $2.5 million worth of this hypothetical product, followed by exports to China, Japan, Germany, and the United Kingdom. And so if you were using my matrix, you would put double X's for those countries in that column one of which countries were the leading markets. You go to the next slide.
There is no others. There is no others.
Oh, keep scrolling down. I think. Keep going. Yeah. So this one is the same table in rank order by percent change over the past 4 years. Once you generate a table and put it into Excel, you can resort it. And so this is the same data, but resorted for column 2024, and it shows, for column percent change 21-24, and it shows which countries were not just the leading from before, but the fastest growing. And you see that China increased by 2,000% over the 4 years, and Vietnam by 418%, et cetera. So in column 2, you would put 2 X's for the top countries in that column. Let's scroll down. Then you would say, well, which ones continued to grow? And you see percent change in the next to last column. China continued to grow by 90% in the latest year, followed by Taiwan 34% in the latest year. So that would be column 3. And so from one table, you can just resort them this way. Go ahead to the next one. Then we get into the import side, the world importers, which were the leading importers of that same product at 6-digit, let's say, harmonized code. And the leading importers were Vietnam, UK, Italy, USA, and France. And that also shows their percent changes. And then you want to see which ones of those were the fastest growing. Scroll down. And you see that the fastest growing world importers were based on the column percent change in 2022 to 24, Vietnam, Thailand, Hungary. So each time you do one of these tables, it tells you where the X's and double X go in the matrix. And finally, there's 2 others. You scroll down. And this shows which countries continued to increase in the latest year for the same product. And then the final one at the end, final one shows what the U.S. market share was for world exports. You can scroll down. So what were the world exporters of that same product? And you see the U.S. was number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, number 6, with 3.5% of the world share. Now, number 6 sounds good, but 3.4% isn't so hot. But those are the pure raw statistics you can pull up from those 2 sources. Reorganize the tables by sorting on the different columns, and then putting in the double X's, X's, and blanks in the matrix. And what you wind up with is where you have, for a country, the most number of double X's across all the columns. So if it wasn't clear before, these are the kinds of statistics that are free to pull up from one simple source in the Customs Bureau. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. We can shift, I guess, anytime now to Mark.
Excuse me, Maurice, this is Kathy. Where did you say this Excel document is housed?
The Excel document is something I created by going into the original sites that have the statistics.
Oh, okay, got it. So can you share that document with us so we don't have to recreate the wheel?
Yes, yes. Well, I'll share the PowerPoint and the statistics. But
Okay, great.
It's more important to know how to generate those statistics on your own.
Right. Got it.
What I will go through with the 101 companies. I'm going to train them on how to generate these types of statistics and draw the conclusions.
Got it. And I'm sure, I mean, I'm working with Sarita, so I'm sure she's going to be providing this type of thing for me, but I'd like to make sure I know how to do it on my own too.
She incorporates using a different statistical source that we paid for. I was using free sources, but we provided access to her for something called WISER, WISER, which is has all the same statistics but combines international with US.
Okay, got it.
So
Thank you.
Use the same methodology using that database.
Great, thank you.
Way to go, Kathy. Thanks, Maurice. Love Miser stats. Very accurate stuff. All right, so we're switching gears here, how to price, distribute, promote, export products. Mark's been doing this a long time. I was just recapping, our history. Mark and I first met in an office, our branch office, Maurice, back in the day, which you visited a few times over the years, in Santa Ana, California. It was our branch office of the LA district office, which back in the day was in the federal building on Wilshire Boulevard near UCLA, of course. And Mark was exporting food waste disposers to Japan. But before that, while he was coming out of UC Berkeley back in the day, he did a little wine exports back in the day with Gallo. Gallo was a huge exporter of wine back in the 80s. And Mark caught the wave of that, which still is a good export for us, and so especially here from California. Just some housekeeping. I did put some information on some of our TEP shows. That is our trade partnership program, trade event partnership program, where we have an MOU with the show organizers. Like Natural Products Expo that Mark was part of the other week. I put the information on Pack Expo West, which is probably the best packaging show in America. That'll be coming up in September, October. So take a look at that. And I will get you some information on the Licensing Expo in Vegas. That's an excellent show as well. And so we'll follow up on that in the chat. Without any further ado, Mark, it's all yours, and I'll go off screen now. Thanks.
All right, thank you, buddy. What Richard means is, I guess we're getting old. I don't know. Do I share my screen or the?
I think Sandra can help you out with this,
okay.
Mark.
So do you see it? I'll navigate that.
Yeah, it looks great.
Is that? Okay, I still see like the RETAP workshop 4.
One second.
Hi, Mark.
Okay,
I made you co-host too if you want to use your screen.
Okay. Let me see here. It's probably easier if I share. Let me see here. See if I can, I don't know if you guys are, if I open this up, if you guys can see this. Can you see this now?
No.
All right. I don't know what's going on here. Share one more. Let's see, is this on multiple party now? Yeah, okay, now I think you guys should be able to see this. Are you able to see this now?
No.
No.
Oh, that's weird because it's on multiple share. Um, hmm. Really interesting just to pick up the theme of the unknown that we're facing. I helped find a really good broker for Eastern Canada for a real fast growth candy product. And basically, that broker and their retailer said, we don't want anything made in America. Now, if you make it in Canada, it's a different story, but we don't want to sell a US brand. And that came down in the last week or so. Can you
Yeah,
guys?
I'm hearing similar things.
We'll see. It may blow over. Now, this company has, if they had enough volume, could definitely set up co-packing in Canada because the labeling's part of the problem too. But anyway, it's a new wrinkle that they didn't anticipate. Are we able to move forward on the slides or?
Yes.
Okay.
Did
Please
they
let me
tell
know when
you they didn't want to have any candy from the US? Is it
Well,
because
that's
of
what they're saying. We'll see about that.
because of the president? Is it because of terrorists? What is it because of?
No, it's because of nationalism. It's right now, there's like this, and this happens all the time, all over the world. Some incident happens, they're going to burn, Levi jeans as a response to it. So this has happened over the last 30 years in my trade experience. We'll see if it blows over. We don't know. So as Richard said, I've been in the international trade business a long time. Couple different things. I have an organization called California eTech that promotes education and training. I heard one of our participants mention about trying to get contracts with the US government. And there is sam.gov where you can see a lot of tenders, and I recommend that. But California eTech promotes education, training, consulting services at large. In fact, we have a program much like RETAP, and one of our big events is going to be a services export summit in mid-June. So I encourage you guys to attend. It'll be in Orange County, and looking at not products, but services as an export. And then you guys heard me last week, so hopefully you're not too bored yet. And I mentioned all about cross-border e-commerce, which is a delivery system. So that is ongoing. And as you heard, and I'm going to enhance on that today. And then I gave you a couple different websites. Well, NI Exports Inc. is a trading operation. Thanks you for anticipating that. So as Richard said, I got started working for a small company in the late 80s that was exporting the kitchen waste disposer. Back then, this company was representing one of the largest manufacturers, which really was an assembler. They just brought in the parts even in the late 80s and assembled those all out of Anaheim, California. And this was pre-internet, and we established a distribution network with that all over Asia. Then I got my start kind of accidentally when one of our buyers said, we hate your company. Can you supply us? And then this started a whole odyssey for about 10, 15 years, selling throughout Asia and Japan. Richard even went with me to my contract manufacturer in the great state of Wisconsin. And then by the late 90s, what was happening is Japan's economy was really in free fall, and it was really getting hard to sell US products for a number of reasons. Some of the things you're hearing today about tariffs and VAT and other taxes, but also a lot of our manufacturers were starting to offshore at that time, and it was getting hard to really sell a made in China product back to these same buyers. And it was about that time that I started looking at services, particularly education and training, and then started through a market development cooperator program, which is a U.S. Department of Commerce funded program looking at education and training as an export. And what we found, this was post 9/11, there were a lot of challenges for schools. They hadn't really used proper marketing to go and acquire international students. So we looked at this as a business and established a model to help schools, brought a number of schools, universities, community colleges, high schools, private schools all over Asia and in the Middle East through the years. I set up a branch office in China. Richard went with me as a precursor to that. Then, through another market development cooperator program, set up an office in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, which we ran for almost 10 years. And then last year, set up an office to promote education in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. So, as Maurice said, and Richard said, the best way to export and do international business is to be on the ground, have primary research, and with these offices, been able to do that. And then wrote a book thanks to a Port of LA program called Exporting the Connected World, which is due for a revise. They pretty much have written it, but things keep changing so quickly that maybe it'll come out in digital form sooner than later. And then I've mentioned to you guys about cross-border e-commerce. So anyway, that's a little background on me. I don't think I even offered that last seminar. Next slide, please. So today's presentation is a very broad set of topics. We're going to talk about international distribution, finding market partners, and then look at pricing. And I have a lot of real-time information to share with you. Next slide. So this is always the key. How do I determine the best distribution model for what I'm selling? Now, most of you may not be selling the Nike Air or Air Jordans or whatever it may be, but the question is of course, what product or service am I selling and how should that product be sold? One thing that the data that Maurice is so adept at finding doesn't always tell you is how, once I know there's a market, is this product actually sold in country X or Y? And that's always a challenge. And what I mean by that is this a direct-to-consumer model? Is it going to be online? Or is it going to be offline through retail? Or is it going to be sold some other way? And will you need a distributor for multiple channels? And can you even find these folks? And then sometimes, and the reason I put up the Air Jordan is, what is the role model? You need to identify when you're selling your product. If my company were able to successfully export, what product would I look at and say we want to have the similar success? And sometimes it could be, a first world brand that everybody knows, and if you can pick off a little bit of that. Now, when I sold kitchen disposers, I had a really easy target, my former company. I knew I wanted to compete directly against them, and I could be kind of, if they were Hertz, I could be Avis. And so that always helps your model. If you don't know, it's a lot harder. And that's why, whether it's the programs in the 201 that you've heard about that can be funded or the California STEP program, you really need to get to market if you can, or you really need to do a deep data mine to find this model so you have some target in your head. Okay, next slide. So there are some questions that I developed that are pretty basic, but I think are very helpful for product distribution. Number one, who do you expect to buy your product? Who doesn't buy it? That's important too. And it really depends. Are you selling, as Richard mentioned, my connection to the wine industry? If you're selling wine products, you can exclude a younger non-drinking demographic, of course, and that helps a lot. And then what function does your product directly serve? And this can be challenging sometimes. I know there's products that service, if it's a beauty product, it could be for skin, it could be for sort of an OTC purpose, and those are wildly different channels. So you really need to segment that. And then, of course, is the market being met? You may have a patented, unique product, and that's great. And that was the case with the kitchen disposer. But the other side of that is, when you have something unique and new to the market, you may have all kinds of barriers because of misunderstanding. So sometimes solving a problem can be a problem that the market doesn't even know exists. And, so that's my question. What problem are you really solving? And you need to prioritize that, because sometimes you get one message, you're not able to really stretch the market. And when there are multiple target markets, that's not always good because it confuses potential distributors. And then, of course, as I mentioned, who is that model you're looking at? Are there already homegrown, what we call indigenous products serving the market? Are there heavy competitors coming from Southeast Asia or China if you're doing business in Asia? If you're in the Middle East, is that being serviced by lots of European products? And many times you find that. And then, of course, at the bottom, these are pretty essential issues. How much are consumers paying or willing to pay for the product? And that's always a big issue. Now you heard I started with the kitchen disposer. What's amazing about that is you may go to Home Depot and see now kitchen disposers are not cheap. They're even the low end ones, if you call that, are $100, and then you may see something for $350, which years ago seemed sky high. But at the time I was selling in Japan, believe it or not, the retail price for the kitchen disposer was upward of $1,000, even $1,500. And that was because it was being sold door to door, if you will, direct to consumers that had a tremendous delivery cost to the consumer. And how much of the product is being bought. Now, that is a big problem. As Maurice has told you with the numbers, sometimes numbers tell you one thing, hey, there's a great market, but as Maurice said, it could be we have a huge amount of exports, but we're still getting a puny amount compared to the overall size of the market. Or it could be there's really no trackable market, but what there is, you and maybe a competitor are getting the entire market. And again, that gets down to where is it purchased? As I mentioned, if it's being purchased door to door or through direct sales, probably going to be a pretty small market. Next slide. Okay, so this is something that you hear a lot about, agents or reps and distributors. Well, I can tell you real time, I'm never really a big fan of a representative or agent. I started in Japan with what you would call a representative. And that was somebody that was empowered to go out and talk and communicate with distributors or third parties that could buy the product. The representative did not buy the product. And the good and the bad with this is sometimes that's great to have somebody in the market that's promoting, but you're not always collecting firsthand information. So as you see, a agent or rep, they don't take title and they get paid by commission, and all of the marketing costs are generally borne by you as the seller, and they don't have the authority per se, but then again, they do. And in theory, they're supposed to have transparent communication. But what I found with representatives is they're out there promoting your product or your brand, and they're saying a lot of things that probably are not exactly what you want to be said. I have this experience right now where I'm involved with a project where there is a rep signed by agreement in Costa Rica. Well, they haven't produced any cells. They keep chasing distributors, in consumers, even big retailers, but it's not coordinated based on what the original thought was. This agent would focus strictly on the potential importers that have their own outlet, like a supermarket or a direct retail network. And they're really not doing this. They're just throwing darts all over the place, despite the effort to kind of rein them in. On top of that, this was supposed to be only for Costa Rica. What do we find out? They're chasing opportunity in Paraguay and Latin America, anywhere that they find a lead. And then on top of it, this is for a set of products that are very discreet. Well, what they're coming back with to the group that wants to sell is, hey, we know you have this set of products, but can you supply X? So I know that reps and agents can be very good if they're very specifically seated to a product or a brand and they have experience there. But if it's more general, you're going to have trouble. Now, on the other side, why are distributors, in my mind, always better? You're talking to someone that's going to import and sell your product. And so you're getting feedback from usually a group that knows the market for your brand very well. And you really do hope that they're managing some analogous type of brands because it helps. off the top, they're going to give you feedback. Hey, this is very sellable. These are the features you have to promote. And then they're normally going to tell you exactly what channels you need to go after. Now, the other factor with distributors, because we're going to talk about price, distributors are going to help you with warranties. If you sell anything that has issues where there could be problems, you need to be able to support the product. When I was selling disposers, there would be all kinds of issues that would come up. Wouldn't turn on, a part would break. Who would handle that? Who would manage that? And in a market like Japan, there was expectations to have immediate service and many times just replace the product. And if you're working with an agent or a rep, they're not going to be able to handle that. So you need a distributor that can handle all of that. And then the other part of about a distributor is they're going to see trends in the market. Now, in the best case, that's going to be feedback to you as the seller, an exporter. But in many cases, you're going to have this challenging relationship where the distributor is not always going to share everything that's going on in market. And that's why you, as the seller, need to be going to market to find out firsthand too, visiting clients, talking to the end buyers to know, because otherwise, if it's just a helicopter strategy, which I mean you fly in, you fly out, you probably are not going to gain the knowledge. And what do you think could happen? When prices get tough, or we just mentioned in Canada where there could be a buy Canada motivation or stop buying American, very quickly your product, if there are competitors, could be substituted out. Okay, next slide. So market entry, one thing you have to look at about this is, as I talked last time with cross-border e-commerce, how do you see the product being sold? In most cases, we start with what we call a skimming strategy. You have an internet or a website, you get an order, you ship it by FedEx, DHL, USPS, and you're exporting. And then you say, well, you know what? We're starting to see a bubble of orders. We want to try maybe a trade show in Japan, the beauty show, or Richard mentioned, I forgot which show it was in another market where you can really go direct to market. What will happen normally is if you already have some interest, you're selling, maybe you're already talking to a few small companies, you go to a trade show. Hopefully, you're going to identify distributors. You may find a rep or agent says, look, we're really good. We can find you the buyers. And that may work out as a short-term strategy. So as an exporter, you look for an importer. As I should back up when I mention distributors. The best case scenario is a distributor that's a stocking importer. They buy your product, they manage the inventory, they work directly with wholesalers and retailers, and they're managing all of that. Or you may have a very big retail. Okay, maybe some of you are already selling to Sam's or Costco. The exciting thing now is Sam's and Costco's footprint is growing globally. So they may bring you into market and you may be doing a direct sell into Taiwan or into another market. And that's what we call a direct sell to the market. And then this next phase of licensing and franchising, one of the reasons I'm doing this service summit I talked about is what I'm finding now is I'm coming up with some really interesting products. They have some success in the US market, but what we're finding, some of the best markets could be China or Japan or even in Canada, but we can't sell the finished product for a number of reasons. We're too expensive. There's a lot of packaging and modifications. So what's coming up is the real need with these companies I'm mentioning where they have IP, they have patents, they have technology, they have their trademarks. They are well positioned to think about licensing that technology to another company that can really service the market. That may include manufacturing locally. It may be developing a completely different product that's sold only in that market or that region. This is rather new for a lot of product manufacturers, but this is accelerating. The candy company I mentioned that was ready to start selling and expanding in Canada, they were already selling in 7-Eleven Canada, but they were stickering the product to meet the language requirements. They had already been looking at a co-packer in Canada and it tried it, they just didn't have enough volume. But they're positioned to license the entire project to a distributor or even their co-packer to manage the market. And then, of course, franchising we all know of, whether you're in food service or you could be in education and training, and you could sell your Montessori. I'm talking to somebody in Cambodia. They're trying to bring in the Montessori school and take the entire model and IP and localize it in Cambodia to deliver it there as Montessori Cambodia, which makes a lot of sense. And then getting back to this licensing, it could be a joint venture. What you may find is that the company in X country, they want the technology, but they really need the manufacturing setup. So I'm talking to a company in Nevada, has great technology, but they're going to have to help set up the manufacturing if it is licensed. And so it would really be a joint venture with another set of, it could be a set of companies for different industries. And then finally, what you find in many cases, and I'm talking to in the education sector, where companies that are very strong, they want to just set up an entire operation in X country. Cambodia is an example. They want to set up a regional set of schools where they can then attract students from other parts of Southeast Asia, but it is a direct foreign investment where they own the operation, they hire the instructors, and then they service the market not only for that country, but multiple countries. And then as you see on that orange graph, the amount of control. If you're looking for export orders and that's all you want, then you're going to probably be at the top of this pyramid. If it's very important to control your technology, to control everything, then you're going to migrate down to this direct foreign investment. But that is a lot of capital cost. It is a lot of work. It takes a team. So it's not always for the small, medium-sized company, but that really is the landscape of market entry. Next slide. Okay, so I share this story about Japan. Yanasi, believe it or not, is an importer and one of the biggest distributors in Japan for any product. But essentially, I share this story because what happened for years and years and years, they were the exclusive distributor of VW or Volkswagen. And as you can see, they built Volkswagen from nothing in Japan to one of the leading car makers. They were able to handle everything. And what happened is Volkswagen reached a certain point and said, you know what? We want to change our approach from going through Yanasi, this distributor in Japan, to having VW Japan. And it was a terrible mistake because, as I mentioned, distributors always know the market. And then in this case, they built incredible infrastructure. What you guys may not know is in Japan, every 3 years, you have to have what they call JIS inspection, which is essentially if your car is not running like what it was running when you first bought it, you will not pass inspection. That's why there's such coveted demand for Japanese resale cars because they maintain such a super high standard. So when VW entered the market, basically Yanasi said, okay, what we're going to do, and we're going to move to Opel, another brand, German brand, and they created even higher volume. So you have to be very careful when you pick your entry strategy and you pick a distributor because they, in this case, Yanasi, are more powerful than the brand itself. Next slide. So what I mentioned is Yanasi in Japan is an intermediary. They're not the brand, but they are the third party building the brand in the market. One thing that I started as is, and maybe you guys have heard this term, EMC or export marketing or export management company. Essentially, I know Simona works in this capacity, and there are many really talented people and companies. All they do is they manage exports for established US brands. And there's some very big companies doing this. There are companies like Dorian International, American Trading International, what is it? American Marketing International that just does food products. Dorian International does a cluster of different brands, and they're doing hundreds of millions of dollars of export, representing very well-known US brands. And they do everything for the US brand. They buy the product, they do all the marketing, they work with the brand to take all their latest marketing collateral, localize it into a market. And there's tremendous advantages to manufacturers because you get a ready-made company that knows international markets that can deliver access to the distributors we talked about, as well as being focused exclusively on distribution management in a region of the world. Many times, what's happening are the export marketing companies, export management companies, they're focused on a region or a country. So if you want to do business in Japan, you really want to work in this case, like with Yanasi, or in smaller cases, the companies I had mentioned before, they really know the regions well. In most cases, it's getting hard to be a globalist. So you're finding these intermediaries are much more specific into one region of the world. Now, you may ask, well, hey, as a manufacturer, that's a lot better. I just plug into these guys. But then you ask, well, what do these guys want? Normally, an EMC will work on anywhere from 10 to 25%. So the margin is given away in a healthy way from the manufacturer to these third parties. And then the other part of it is what happens if there's some change of management at a US manufacturer and the EMC is told, okay, that relationship is no longer valid. Well, what happens? EMC will go find a complementary brand, they'll introduce it into the market. And by the way, what is happening because of margins, that complementary brand becomes maybe a white brand, which what I mean is it may be a complete private label the EMC has developed because they're finding little by little, as I know myself, it's hard to make money redistributing a well-known brand because margins, particularly in fast-moving consumer goods and the grocery industry, are so small, there's no margin there. So what happens after the brand has been established in X region or X market, something happens with that manufacturer, the relation goes bad, that EMC will turn to either their own brand or another brand. They'll plug it in because they maintain these very good relationships with the distributors, the buyers in X region, and they have those relationships. And guess what? You've all of a sudden lost your business, even though you don't know about it. So intermediaries are fantastic. They build the markets, but you don't, as a manufacturer or brand, control the market, as I mentioned in the case of Yanasi. Next slide. Okay, so one delivery model, as I mentioned last week, for anybody that wasn't here, is cross-border e-commerce. And I don't want to belabor that, but as you see, what are the best-selling products on cross-border? Fashion, electronics. Well, in the middle, you have food and beverage, health supplements, lifestyle products in general. They're growing pretty quickly. So I really believe in cross-border as a channel. Richard may have mentioned a really interesting distribution model that has just popped up. So Coupang, which is the equivalent of Amazon in Korea, is doing a collaboration with the commercial service to look for new fast-moving consumer brands, particularly in beauty, food and bev, health supplements, that they can review and sort of do like a fast pitch and select for the platform. And if they select you, they're going to guarantee at least one order of like around $10,000. So very interesting. But cross-border is popular all over the world. And with this new Liberation Day, it may be the one channel that you have to look at because cross-border has essentially been, as I mentioned last week, the workaround paying these high duties because you're able to sell bypassing or paying a very small nominal one-time duty fee, whether it's China or other parts of the world. So it is a channel to think about. And as I mentioned, there are many platforms. There's Coupang for Korea, Rakuten for Japan, Shopee and Lazada are throughout Southeast Asia, but moving very quickly into Latin America. Amazon plays very strong in Europe and North America and in Singapore and in the Middle East. So there are a number of very accessible platforms that you can leverage. Okay, next slide. I mentioned too last week that we think of e-commerce, you just list products on a website. That's true. But as I mentioned last week, the rise of social media, in this case, this is really in reference in Thailand to Facebook live selling. But of course, we know TikTok is moving just as quick. That is servicing more of the market than anything else. Now, it may be a hybrid model. You may have a local distributor that buys a very small amount, and that's the only way they sell is they're doing the live stream in the local market. Trying to manage this direct in market is really tricky. I'm talking directly to some of these big platforms like the TikTok equivalent in China. And to be honest with you, it's nearly impossible for US brands to make any money to sell that way in China. But I will tell you, getting back to what I mentioned about license, there is tremendous interest from Chinese third parties and even the platform to find and buy established brands or to license outright established US brands. So I'm seeing that trend even moving through social media. Okay, next slide. Okay, so alternative distribution are ways you wouldn't think of selling the product. I mentioned direct sales, so uh, Mary Kay, Avon, Amway, these are multi-billion dollar companies that do great business not only in Japan, but in Latin America and are very well established. I see this in Vietnam in what is it, New Skin, and they have this direct selling model that works. So those big companies are always buying new products. So they're a potential channel, or they're smaller direct sales channel companies that will buy products. Television sells. Believe it or not, when I was in Japan in fall, I ended up buying a vacuum that I bought through television shopping through a friend. So even though it seems old school, it still does very well in some of these markets. And then I just talked about the cross border. These are what we think of non-traditional distribution channels, but are very, very significant. I didn't mention earlier Mercado Libre, but that is a fast growing online selling channel in Latin America. So look that up. They are also creating new pathways for US brands to sell in that region. Next slide. Okay, one thing I will tell you that maybe you're in this business, but it is always a headache if you're promoting a well-established brand. Gray market, parallel markets, diversion, these are always big issues. If you get interest in Coca-Cola and jeans and Marlboro cigarettes, and I think these are probably passé now, these are always very challenging. I just had a request through a very good channel in Cambodia. They're looking for Kirkland brand. So, you know, Kirkland is the brand of Costco, and they want to buy quote unquote gray market, which means somebody goes into a Costco or a business center and buys a pallet of Costco supplements, which are very popular, easy to sell because everybody that travels back and forth between Cambodia will end up in a Costco and they want that brand. The problem is with gray market, you're not really authorized to sell, and it's going to be really hard parallel to buy these products because you get a basic price. If it's $10 off, maybe you get that one-time offer, but you have a very hard time making any margin on that. So these are only businesses that work well when the currency is very weak. Right now, with the high dollar, it's very hard for this to work. And then I mentioned some of those famous brands. That's actual outright diversion, where if somebody's asking, and in Kirkland to some degree, they're asking for famous brands. You go into a wholesaler, maybe you go into a Jetro Foods or you go into Sam's Club, you buy a pallet. Even those companies will sell to you, quote unquote, for export, but they're honest. They're going to say, oh, if you're looking for these brands, we can't sell to you because the manufacturer, they know if there's a big one-time order, that's going to be diverted and it's going to be sold back to a market where there's already distribution. So I share this. You don't really want to be in that business. And if you are representing a really good brand, you always have to make sure that the brand is policing itself, because this kind of stuff will hurt your brand. Okay, next slide. So, tools of the trade, I mentioned unsolicited inquiries. Gold Key, this was one product I used to develop a distribution for a brand called No Bugs, believe it or not, in Korea. And that was, and still is, one of the very best things you can use. Trade shows, internet data mining, that's always a great way to find distributors. And then social media is a good way to make initial contacts. But the reason why I'm still doing this is because of human connections. Without that, which is the very best way to build distribution, find cells, you're not going to be successful. So it's always a matter of building the right connections, and you're doing it right because between Maurice, Simona, and Richard, you've got some really great contacts and some of the other multipliers coming on to this program. Okay, next slide. Well, one thing is if you really are excited to build your brand proactively, you've got resources now. Maurice mentioned you've got funding through the 200 series to actually get money to do a gold key or maybe to help facilitate into the STEP reimbursement program. So the California STEP program, I took this photo right here that says California at the Hong Kong Food Show. I think we had 8 companies. I was helping out as a consultant on that. And all of those brands were able to meet hundreds and hundreds of buyers, distributors, and consumers. Only thing I will tell you is be very careful. What happened out of that was not good was some of those brands had their brand name squatted on. So if you're going to go to certain markets, make sure you get your trademarks registered, and there is money in the STEP program to do that. ICF, what this is it is a agent matchmaking program. Now, I have to say, if you're in the service business, agents are probably who you're looking for because it's a little bit different than product distribution. So ICEF, this one was held in Miami. There were 150 agents that were vetted. All they do is they promote study abroad from all over the world, and they're used to promoting different schools, different programs. In a matter of 2 days, you can meet 20 or 30 agents. And then it's very likely if you're a pretty well-known program, you're going to find 10 or 15 agents. How schools and private training providers use that, usually they've already got some partners, but they're looking, let's say, to build up in the Middle East or in Latin America. These programs are very good because they'll bring in partners from all over the world, and you can screen exactly which markets you're looking for. And before you meet them, you're going to have a list of exactly who they represent, so you can get into really granular details in that meeting. So I find you don't have to travel overseas. You can do a lot of this right here in America. If you're in the hardware business, which means anything that is tool related, or it could be consumer goods and it's selling through a Home Depot or a Lowe's. There are similar programs they have to meet big buyers like Castorama, the big DIY chains, Metro, that they do at the Hardware National Show in Las Vegas. So there are programs like this for many different industries. I'm just sharing one that gets you right in front of agents, and this is done right here in the United States. You can do events in other parts of the world, but why not start with the one in the United States? Okay, next slide. So what if you don't have money, you don't want to travel? Well, one of our Richard introduced me to was around the scenes. I don't know what Rob Dorff is doing now, but Rob told me a very interesting story. Rob used to have a company that sold one of the first protein energy bars. And what he did is his protein bar was somewhat analogous to Cliff Bar, Power Bar. He would go on and data mine those websites of his competitors and find their international distribution list. And this is an example where he found a distributor in Australia, or in this case, Argentina. And as you see, they put the email, and he sent out emails to a lot of these folks and identified potential partners. The screenshot is from Google search in India for education and training consultants. Same thing. They put websites out. You can data mine. You can put a number of these agents together and do an email blast. To be honest, this doesn't work fantastically. The yield is maybe 1 or 2%, but it's better than nothing. What Richard has mentioned, his international market search is way better, but this is just old school way of data mining. And I always say, in the beginning, try that. Okay, next slide. And so one thing Richard didn't mention is the platinum key. When we started CBEC Asia, what we did is we went to Thailand. We worked with the U.S. Commercial Service Office in Thailand. They put together a great event. We rented a room, and in a matter of 3 hours, we met all the ecosystem for e-commerce, everybody from Facebook to the CP group to Shopee to lots of local influencers. And we had an event to meet and find out where there was a chance to promote US brands, in this case, California brands. And it was highly successful, which became the genesis for CBEC Asia. So that's another tool in the commercial service toolbox. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I know I'm running out of time. I don't want to get to pricing. Why don't we move on to the next one? So these are some websites to data mine. I think Maurice talked about some of these that are, the bottom three are all free. The top two, well, the peers data is for a fee, and there are other cheaper data services like that, but reach out to us. We can probably help steer that to you. I just want you to know there are great, easy public domain sources you can leverage. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Some real quick things about how to screen, and I know David's going to talk about this more. References, past success, and also, I think very importantly, you need to have a distributor that you can work with that's going to share insight on the market. If you're not getting that, it's probably not the partner you want. You want somebody that's going to give you and educate you about the market conditions. So maybe you have products you haven't brought to market overseas that they can help you deliver. That's really key. And it's having a business partner as much as a distributor overseas. Okay, next slide. Well, again, this was some of the same stuff. Let's move on to the pricing because next slide. So I've kind of covered this in my first slide. Who is going, how is your product going to be sold? But very important, because I heard someone say that, oh, we're selling X works. This is very important when you develop pricing, because although X works means picked up at your facility, many buyers around the world are going to ask for specific Incoterms, and that will affect your prices. So remember, you have to think about a lot of these issues. So which market are you going to? Are you facing tariffs, which now could be everywhere? And then is that market segment a discount market or is it a premium market? And then do you have flexibility to eat price if suddenly there's a tariff that raises stuff 25%? And how do you cope with really fast moving currency adjustments? So these are some just general ideas about thinking about pricing. Okay, next slide. This is an old slide, so don't take this at heart. Some of the Incoterms have changed, but the reason I'm sharing this, if we were to draw a line between exporter and importer in a very crude way, what that is the difference between risk. So I mentioned X work, that is no risk to you as a seller, because basically from the importer's point all the way back to X work, the risk is on them. But conversely, if you are to offer a duty delivered price or DDP, you move that arrow the different way. So you as the exporter, that arrow goes all the way to DDP, which means you have risk all the way to the end buyer. Now you may ask, why would I ever want to do DDP? Well, for 15 years in Japan, I had importers in Japan. They told me very clearly, we don't want to do anything. You give us a price and it is to our warehouse, which means we open our doors and once it's there, we get the product. And quite honestly, for years and years and years, that DDP with the extra fee and fees was a little bit of a profit center until the currencies adjusted, because in most cases, if you offer something like a DDP, you're going to have to pay in local currency, and you're going to have to know that when you adjust, you're not losing money. And that's great when currencies aren't moving or gyrating, but in this world, it gets riskier and riskier. So this is a very broad composite, but I share this because it shows you risk. Okay, next slide. I also stole this from a good friend of ours, Richard. You may remember Madeline Grant very well. Madeline worked for a company called Pacific World that sells a fake nail kit into all over the United States, but all over the world too. And the reason I share this is she broke down every element of the product, from the nail to the glue to the buffer to the card to the shrink wrap to the MasterCard. So she had all of those built into her price. As you see, I mean, this is very old now, but the price was 36.6. So that was the price. Then she built in the overhead. Let's say it's 10%. So she knew at 46.6 cents, that was their net cost. And then her export price in this case was $1.99. And so they were starting with a baseline with that general export price of 76%, which you think, oh, wow, that's a high export price. Well, in theory it is, but once you're doing business with a lot of distributors, they may be trying to pioneer into markets where you work with a market or a supermarket or a retailer, they want 20% advertising co-op, or they need a introductory discount of another 15%. So this is a guideline, and I share that each and every one of you, as you begin to export, should develop a price list like this so you know. While I was waiting to come on back to Central America, the team I'm helping said, hey, we're going to offer these prices to our buyer that is a very big retail buyer. And they came back, and when I looked at their price, they had nowhere near the 76%. They were ready to offer basically 50 cents. If the cost of goods was 46 cents, they were about ready to offer 50 cents. And I said, hey, when you start to factor in your overhead, which is very smart, I think at a minimum you have to have 10% in your cost just built to that. So you know, rain or shine, when you offer a price, that you are getting that minimum 10%. When they did that litmus test, they were actually losing money. So you need to establish a really good cost sheet. Okay, next slide. Here are some elements. I know this is not very clear, but this is showing different freight. Now, one really tricky thing is, one thing, your client may ask for insurance. They may ask for all the document fees have to be factored in. It may go by air freight. There are a lot of factors, so you need to develop these whole set of costs. And if you are working with a freight forwarder, which I know you will come in, or a NVOCC or whoever that is in this process, they need to give you a very detailed breakdown. And you need to be very careful. You may be selling, and I had this experience in cross-border. This buyer in Singapore bought the goods, but it was a potato chip. And what happened, the volume is very big, the way it was shipped. So we were basing the freight quote on weight. And when the quote came back on volume, it was like triple. And somebody, whoever's responsible based on the terms I told you, are you offering CIF or DDP price, or is it X Works where your buyer is? Somebody's going to get a very rude awakening. So these are always dangerous. That's why you need to add in all the prices from the shipping element in the final price. Okay, next slide. Okay, some final things before I run out of time is you need to figure out some allowances, and that could be for delays. It could be customs hold. This is very common. First time products go through customs, it could be held for another week or two. And if it's held a week or two, not only are you going to have to pay extra fees when you pick up your goods, what if this product's already committed to a retailer? You may get a fine for not delivering that. So there are other factors that come with the shipping and the logistics that you aren't even thinking about. And then also expiration dating. One of the big problems when you sell food, and I saw this, by the way, Richard, with Coupang, if they want packaged food, you can't have less than 90-day expiration dating. And it's actually a lot worse on cross-border. It's more like you have to have 9 months when you ship. Well, if you're shipping something like a potato chip, go look at a bag of chips. They're usually 6 months. you have to have very special packaging to meet that. So there are a lot of concerns, and you may have a higher cost to have a different bag that you haven't even thought about. So these are other factors, some of the other factors there too. I know I'm speaking about this really fast, but I just want you to think there are always a lot more issues in pricing that you probably have given thought to. Okay, next slide. Another factor is many times your client will say, okay, give me a CIF price to Bangkok. Well, that's not easy to do. If you're going to sell a container of product, you can get a quote from a cargo company or a freight forwarder pretty easily. But if it's one pallet, it becomes a lot more difficult. And if it is LCL, which means less than a full container, you may have to have very special packaging. And you think, oh, what is that? Shrink wrap, or they're going to have to harden the package. Believe me, what we found with cross-border shipments too to Singapore is that it needs very special packaging. It needs a black shrink wrap because it'll be dark, and then it needs special cardboard to have over that. Oh, what if you're selling candy? You're going to need a very special type of a mylar packaging to keep the product cool, or everything is going to melt. So you better think about this in advance and start to ask your supplier, if you're not the maker, what are the special handling requirements? It may not be a problem if it's a certain part of the world, but if you're going to the Middle East, forget it. You're going to need a refrigerated container. Probably the same for Southeast Asia. And then I mentioned warranty. It's very difficult. How do you establish a warranty if you're a small company, your distributor doesn't have a real network, or maybe like me, you're buying the product from a contract manufacturer, you get motors, you get these different parts. Well, then who's going to fix it? Well, we settled on, or actually, I should say my former boss settled on a very good idea years ago. Based on the failure rate of the product, he worked out a deal with his manufacturer. 2% is given as a in lieu of a warranty, which means if you buy 100 disposers, you get 102. And then you keep those two and you tell your distributor, look, the failure rate is less than 1%, but we're giving you two. If anything happens, then you can just swap it out. Well, what we found in real terms is you did need some spare parts to manage this, but this warranty model, at least in the near term, was pretty successful. And there's variations of this, but you have to factor that in your cost price because maybe your manufacturer won't agree to that and you're going to have to eat that. So you're going to have to build up a higher margin to pay for that warranty. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that's it. I don't know if I ran into David's time, but if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer one or two real quick.
I'll check the chat.
Is that
box.
overkill?
Let me check any chat questions. Those billable hours that David charges are going to cost you, Mark.
Okay. Well, I didn't get into a
just
full
kidding.
hour, so maybe I'm okay.
No, you're good. You're good. Great commentary. Excellent forensic approach to ensuring that you guys are, doing the paperwork and doing the business with your agents and distributors and entering the market in a way that prices you effectively. And multiple sources, Mark. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think segueing to David Habib. How do you balance cross-border internet selling and distributor? There you go, Mark. Can you handle that one? We'll do that one right before we segue to David.
Very easy. I think when I mentioned the cross-border last time, if there's going to be with a beauty product or a food product, a long out to get traditional approval to sell it offline through a distributor, probably in the near term, you want to test with cross-border like Amazon selling because it is kind of a skimming strategy to find out how successful you'd be. So that's my number one litmus test. If you're already beyond that, you already are selling pretty frequently and you don't have these issues with a beauty product or food, it may not be the same. But for certain product categories, cross-border is certainly my first step. And then I look to offline distribution, whether that's Coupang, Rakuten, Tmall, if you're seeing success, then you want to migrate offline and you're going to probably get inquiries because there's going to be interest. So I think it's the starting point for certain brands. Just like your website, it's a starting point to maybe get an inquiry. So that's how I would see it in a very simple nutshell.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Mark. Great question, Elaine. All right, so here's to bring us home, Mr. David Habib, attorney extraordinaire for many years, 25 plus years. We've been working with David. As I had mentioned earlier, David started the World Trade Center Association back up in Oxnard back in the day, and has been on our district export council for a dozen plus years and has chaired our Southern California District Export Council and just a go-to perfeccionado for doing business with foreign agents and distributors and making sure from a legal perspective you've crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's. And so, David, without any further ado, bring us home, sir.
Thanks, Richard. Well, I don't know how everybody feels about listening to a lawyer to bring them home, but I guess that's the way it's been set up. So can you hear me, I guess? All right.
Oh, yeah, you sound great. Your slides are up and running fine.
Thanks very much. So I'm assuming somebody else will control the slides, okay?
Yeah, Sandra,
Yes, sir.
Kim, Peter, who are effectively managing the program from the chamber, will help us out. No
Okay.
problem.
So I think the first thing I'd like to say is I'd like to commend everybody for attending this series of lectures, which are just tremendously valuable from my standpoint. Tremendous amount of information, obviously very accurate information, sometimes information not easy to find, information coming from very experienced people. So kudos to the LA Chamber and Maurice and Richard and the team that put this together, and to all of you who are attending this. Brief, I guess, summary of my experience. I started out of law school, very fortunate, working for one of the largest conglomerates on the planet. So with that, I moved around. I lived in Europe. I lived in the Middle East, and was sitting pretty much in an ivory tower, which was a terrific, being overpaid as a young attorney with a lot of experience. At some point, several years later, I got kind of drafted into a role of a COO in a trading company. And I was a reluctant draftee, if you will, in that I was comfortable in my ivory tower as a lawyer. But as a COO, I had to learn all kinds of things that I didn't really have to deal with as a lawyer. Relationships, labor matters, taxes, marketing, what have you. So accounting, and on balance, I learned very quickly that that was a terrific learning exercise. It really benefited my practice and my perspective and how I could counsel clients. So I hope I bring that to the table when I counsel my clients. So what are we doing with contracts? Contracts are designed to help you reach an objective, if you will, but also to manage risks. Okay, the engagement or the conduct of international business really is an exercise in managing risks, and of course, domestic business is also an exercise in managing risks. But obviously, there's more issues and some real complications and differences in managing risks internationally. So, assuming most people are interested in transactions involving the sale of goods, that's how I'm going to approach this, pretty much, rather than services. This is a general overview of how I look at contracts involving the international sale of goods. What issues do we need to deal with? I start out with risk profiles. One of the things I had to learn when I got in the COO seat, if you will, was how to analyze the transaction from the beginning to the end, and who is responsible for what from the beginning to the end of the transaction, from the time the product is produced to the time that the consumer gets it. And how does my client or my company relate to each and every one of those little dots, if you will, that have to be connected. So you'll see that in the next slide, I think we're not there yet, but no, let's back it up. I try to break down risk profiles from the time the product is produced to the time it's delivered. The next thing is, and I see that Mark dealt with this, and he's right. What are agents and distributors, and what's your market penetration strategy? Is it direct? Is it through intermediaries? We're going to talk about agents and distributors and representatives. Dependent versus independent is something that I had to learn the hard way, frankly, and we'll talk about that. In other words, the people that you're dealing with that are either agents or distributors or representatives, are they dependent on you? Are they independent? And what's the significance of that? Are they exclusive or non-exclusive? Delivery terms, delivery risks, Incoterms. Mark touched on that. I cannot overemphasize how important that is for you to understand if you're involved in the international sale of goods, to understand Incoterms and delivery terms, because they allocate the risks of each step of the transaction between the buyer and the seller. Payment terms, payment risks, obviously everybody wants to get paid. Sometimes we can become so focused on getting paid that we lose track of other elements of the transaction that can affect your ability to be paid or when you're paid. So we'll talk briefly about that, although I think delivery terms and payment terms are a separate presentation, but I'll touch on them. Convention on Contracts for International Sale of Goods. This is a treaty signed by most developed countries, that a lot of lawyers don't understand this. This is a default law that applies to all international sale of goods between countries that have signed the treaty. What's the significance of that? Well, that treaty sets up a set of rules for these commercial transactions involving goods that are different from the Uniform Commercial Code, which most domestic lawyers and commercial people are aware of. So we'll talk very briefly about that. Intellectual property rights, everybody knows how important that is. I think that's a separate presentation also. Host country laws and regulations, Mark touched on it. We'll touch on it again just a little bit, and I think that's also a separate presentation. Regulatory issues, host country standards, export controls, anti-corruption. A lot of those, I believe, are also a separate presentation, but I do want to touch on them. Next slide, please. Okay, this may seem a little bit pedantic or unnecessarily detailed, but I break this down because it's important, okay? Risk profiles before shipment. What are the product specs? Where's the product coming from? Where's the factory, the warehouse? Who's going to handle transportation of it inland? Who's going to inspect it? Who's responsible for packaging? All of these things, the question is, who's responsible for this? And much of that is determined by your Incoterms, okay? Not all of it, but much of it. Export licenses, payment and delivery terms. These are things that you have to keep in mind. You have to anticipate ahead of time in order to properly manage your risks so you don't have a problem. The whole idea is you want to know at the end of the day that you've, to the best of your ability, you have planned for whatever risks are associated with the transaction. Next slide, please. Port of exit. Getting it to the port, storing it, handling it, loading it. What happens if it's damaged? What documentation is required? I have payment and delivery term risks here because, again, depending on your Incoterms and the terms of your contract, your payment may be affected, all right? Or when you're paid can be affected. All depends on how you've written your contract and what Incoterms apply. What can happen if the port is loaded and there are a lot of delays and the product is sitting there? Somebody is storing that product and whoever that is wants to be paid for it. Is that you? Is that the buyer? Is it the seller? Is it somebody else? Okay, next slide, please. International transport. You have a forwarder involved. You have a carrier involved. Bills of lading or airway bills. Shipper's responsibilities. Again, Incoterms. Limitations on liability. There's a treaty that affects limitations of liability of the carrier. Insurance, damage or destruction, delays, transshipment. All of these things are issues that you have to plan for. And it's not overwhelming. If you just think it through and you understand Incoterms and you pay attention to your contract, You can plan for all these things. Let me give you an illustration of delays in transshipment and intervening events and how that can affect you. I had a client, fantastic guy from Africa, West Africa, and he wanted to put together a trade show. He did a lot of spade work for about a year, and I held his hand getting all the things ready to do it. I walked him through all of these things that you're going to see in this slide presentation. He paid attention to everything. He loved it. Again, it took him 10 months to a year to get this set up. He rented a facility in, I forget what country it was in, maybe Namibia, I'm not sure, I don't recall, for a trade show of his products. And he invited all of these political people and very high-rolling commercial people in Africa to show up for this trade show. What did he do wrong? He didn't pay attention to how he booked his cargo that he was sending over there to demonstrate his product. So while he's sitting in Namibia and these other people are waiting for the cargo to show up and the products to be demonstrated, he doesn't even know where the products are. Why? Because he didn't pay attention to his how he booked the carriage of his product, and it never showed up. So he lost a considerable amount of money as a deposit for the facility in Namibia, which was non-refundable. His reputation was damaged because he had all these people there who were disappointed. And it took us about 6 months to find out that his product was in a warehouse in Italy. And that's because it was dropped off in Italy to be transshipped, and it was never picked up again because the carriers involved had cargo that was more profitable. So could he have planned for that ahead of time? Yes, he could, but he didn't. Next slide. Next slide, please. Destination port. What happens when the cargo is offloaded? I think Mark touched on this a little bit. Customs clearance, duties, tariffs, storage, what have you. Are there import licenses required by your buyer? Did they get the import license? Let's take an example of how Incoterms applies to that. Let's suppose they didn't get an import license, or let's suppose there's some other event taking place in the destination country that leaves the cargo sitting there, and you have agreed to DDP, duties, delivered duties paid, which Mark touched on briefly. You're going to be stuck for all of those costs and the delays involved and what the consequences are. Do the products have to be inspected? Have boycotts or contraband, have boycotts been put in place between the time you shipped it and the time the goods arrived? Documentation. Look, we've done for the LA Chamber at least 2 or 3 programs focused solely on documentation. In a transaction involving the international sale of goods, documents are more important than the cargo. Can I repeat that? The documents are more important than the cargo, because what you're really transferring is the documents which reflect the right to the cargo. If the documents are not in order, you got a huge problem. And of course, payment and delivery term risks are involved. Next slide, please. In-country issues. Again, surface transport, installation and testing of the product. Who's responsible for all of this? Intellectual property, warranty, and service. I put in here relations with the buyer and relations with the customers because that affects you. How the transaction goes down is a reflection of you and what kind of relationships you can count on or can develop as a result of these transactions. And relationships are everything. Again, I'm a lawyer. I've been doing this for a long time. I tell my clients the same thing every time. Relationships are as important or more important than the contract itself. Okay, you're dealing with somebody on the other side of the world. If the relationships go south, you can jump up and down all day long about that piece of paper called a contract, but whether or not that will really resolve your problem is another matter entirely. Okay? Mark also mentioned, when talking about DDP, delivered duties paid, why would anybody do that? He mentioned that that the customers involved, I think it was Japan, insisted that everything be delivered duties paid. There are other circumstances where that might be appropriate. I had a client several years ago husband and wife team, physics scientists involved in the development of high-tech instruments way above my pay grade. I hardly even understood this stuff. They developed a friction measuring device, which was very small, but the cost of it was $250,000. And they didn't trust anybody to deliver that to the client, which was a university in China, except themselves. So the transaction was delivered duties paid. They hand carried it to the client in China. So that was an unusual circumstance. That's why they decided on delivered duties paid, and their client wanted it as well. Next slide, please. Okay. Each of these risk profiles can be addressed for your contract. Incoterms. I can't beat the drum loud enough about Incoterms. You're going to get a separate presentation on it. You want to, when you're anticipating your transaction and your contract, you want to assess what are your resources? What are your financial resources, the labor and time that you can devote to these things? What's your objectives? What are your limitations? What special circumstances are there? Closed economies. What do I mean by that? Up until relatively recently, and I use the word relatively, if you wanted to do business in China, you had to do business through a state trading company. The state trading company had little to no idea about the products or the application of the products involved or anything, but they had the right to handle the money and the right to handle the contracts. The actual user of the products had no rights at all except to use the products once they got them. How does that affect your transaction, how you negotiate it? What are the special circumstances in a particular market? Another wasn't a client of mine, but it was a client, a company that I learned about, sent a large quantity of product to China on spec without realizing that product would never be used in China. They don't use it, so they just weren't thinking about it. They weren't thinking ahead of time. Trade agreements. How does that affect your proposed transaction? Currency controls. This is something that we don't think about here. Currency controls. There are a lot of countries that have controls on their currency. What does that mean? It means that they may need your buyer may need a license to get hard currency to pay you. Okay, that's not uncommon at all. And that license may, even if they can get the license, there may be a limitation on how much hard currency, meaning dollars, they can access at any point in time. They may ask you to, on that basis, to either do the transaction in their local currency, or it may affect your proposed payment terms. It's something that you want to know ahead of time. Failure to address key issues equals unintended consequences. That's pretty much straightforward, I think. It's self-explanatory. Choice of law and dispute resolution. We're dealing across borders here. Okay, it's not uncommon for a company in another country to want their own law to apply to a particular transaction. And it's critical in the event of a dispute what law applies, okay? So here's an interesting example of this, which was how can I say, an unintended success on my part, or an unanticipated success. Years ago, we were sitting in the Ministry of Electricity in Baghdad. There's a war going on. Obviously, this was quite some time ago. We're in the Ministry of Electricity with the deputy minister and a whole conference table full of participants. Me and my client, CEO of a local power company here on the central coast of California. As we're sitting in the Ministry of Electricity, the lights are going on and off, okay? There's a war going on, so the power is going on and off. So they're all embarrassed and whatever. The elevators worked and then they didn't work. The printers and the copiers and whatever worked and they didn't work. Anyway, that's the circumstance as we're sitting there. So we went through this contract. It was about a $400 million power contract. And we're going through it line by line, line by line. There are 3 women sitting around the table, Iraqi women, who've said nothing now for 3 days. As we're going through this contract, we get to the last item, which is what law will apply. Well, I put the law of England would apply because that's a law that's well known and well respected around the world, and even the Iraqis are familiar with it. So I put that in the contract. So at that point, one woman raises her hand Mr. David, why on earth would we want the law of England to apply in a contract in Iraq with the government of Iraq? Of course, my client looks at me expecting me to have some wonderful answer to this question. Well, I started thinking about it and I thought, gosh, it never occurred to me to put the law of Iraq in here. And it never occurred to me that they would raise that question. So I thought about it for a second and it finally came to me. So I said, with respect, ma'am, we don't know what the law of Iraq is. You don't even know what the law of Iraq is. And you won't know what the law of Iraq will be in 60 or 90 or 120 days or a year from now because of all of these disruptions here. So we can't accept that. She accepted my answer, which was an on-the-spot answer, and my client thought I was a genius. But I wasn't a genius because I hadn't even thought about it until that moment. But that illustrates how important it is to think about what law you put in as applicable to your contract. Standard contract. What is that? Okay, so here's another story. I was on a panel several years ago addressing a large group. There were several of us. And one of them was this international banker from South America, Brazil. And after I finished my presentation, a woman raised her hand and said, Mr. Habib, where can I get a standard contract and how much will it cost? And I thought, how am I going to answer this question? Well, I didn't have to answer it because the banker, his name was Jorge, said, ma'am, I don't know what a standard contract is. Do you, David? He goes, is it like a standard suit? It has a jacket and pants? Well, that doesn't mean it fits. So there's no such thing. So he answered the question for me, which I appreciated. And that stuck with me because it's really true. Your transactions are unique to you. I don't know what a standard contract is. Last item on this page, ambiguity and uncertainty are huge problem areas. They are. My approach to contracts is less is more. A lot of my colleagues don't necessarily agree with that. My clients certainly agree with it, but just because it's less doesn't mean that you leave things out. Okay, you anticipate what you need and make sure that what you need is included in your contract. Next slide, please. Okay, here we are. Oh, I don't know how that got disjointed like that. An agent is a technical term in common law here in the United States and in other common law countries. It implies a delegation of authority. Think power of attorney. You're giving someone the authority to do something for you. That's huge. Okay, that means they have the authority to bind you. All right. An agent acts on behalf of their principals within whatever the limits are of the stated agency relationship. And they have duties of care, loyalty, and obedience and accountability. All right. I hear somebody, is there a question?
No, it's just background noise, sorry.
Okay. A distributor, independent party that's contracted to buy and resell goods. Oftentimes a distributor enters into a contract with a number of principals to sell all kinds of different goods. Okay. Normally, the distributor is not compensated by the principal, at least in my experience. The distributor negotiates a pricing scheme, and their money is made by reselling the product. Sometimes a distributor will ask for a marketing advance or some kind of a discount for an initial, I think Mark touched on this, some kind of a discount for the initial quantity of goods, whatever. But the point is that they're an independent party, not acting on behalf of the principal. A representative can be just about anything. A person soliciting sales, but without any authority to obligate the principal. They're a commissioned salesman in a market. They developed potential customers that contract directly with the principal, and they get a commission from the principal. Next slide, please. Exclusive versus non-exclusive. This is a huge issue. Distributors want to be exclusive. Agents want to be exclusive. You can authorize exclusivity or appoint exclusivity based on a number of bases, if you will. Territory, what products are exclusive, what industries they can sell to, what demographic, etc. It can be problematic if it's left ambiguous. If you just say that they're exclusive and don't specify how or what or for what product line, and you've got 20 different product lines, it can be an issue. It can be problematic in trade blocks, if you will, and I put the EU here as an example, because in the EU, you can't prohibit a company in one EU member from selling in another EU member. So it's potentially problematic there on how you structure your relationships with distributors in a trade bloc like the EU. It can be difficult to unwind. Okay, here's the horror story there. You appoint a company that is your exclusive representative, and they have the rights, and they register those rights with the authorities in their country that they're exclusive. And then you have a problem with them for whatever reason. They don't do what they're supposed to do, or they're violating some term of the contract, and you're trying to unwind it. That can be really problematic. Again, you want to be very careful how you enter into these kind of exclusive arrangements and what the contract says in terms of your ability to unwind it. Dependent versus independent. What in the world does that mean? Here's the horror story there, okay? I'm giving a presentation at CSUN. There's 200 people in there, all business people listening to this, and I'm trying to explain why dependent versus independent is important. And so I said something like, well, if you have an arrangement with a distributor in, say, Europe or almost anywhere, really, frankly, but certainly in Europe, and the relationship is such that they are pretty much dependent on you for what they're doing and how they do it and how they price it and how they market it and how they get paid and how they price it and everything. And there's a dispute, and they file a claim against you in that jurisdiction. It's possible that the judicial authority there will find that that party is dependent on you, and ergo, you're doing business there. So when I said that, somebody jumped up in the back of the room at CSUN and said, well, that's not right. That can't possibly be right. And he's screaming across the room. And I said, look, sorry to be the bearer of bad news. It is right. And if they find that you're doing business there, then they're going to also find that you're subject to whatever local laws there are applicable to businesses in that jurisdiction, whether it could be anything like paying the distributor's employees. I know this sounds far-fetched, but it isn't. All right. So it's really important that your contracts with distributors and even agents be real clear about what their authority is and what it isn't. Okay. Nature and extent of permissible activity, nature and extent of prohibited activity, nature and extent of your control over their activities, which should be next to nil. Okay. Nature and extent of approved activities, whether active or passive. What do I mean by that? So, you meet Julio somewhere at a trade show, and he says, look, I can be your representative in Colombia, and I know everybody in Colombia, and I can sell your products. I want an exclusive. And you go, okay. You talk to him for a while. You have a few shooters. He seems like a good guy. You have dinner. It sounds like he knows what he's doing. And you say, fine. So you give him a one-page agreement saying that he's your exclusive rep, and you give him a card. He puts his name on your card along with your logo, and that's what he's passing out in Colombia. It looks like he's your office in Colombia, right? And if you are not on top of what he's doing, monitoring what he's doing, and regulating to some extent what he's doing, and communicating and writing about what he's doing, you could ultimately be found to be doing business in Colombia because you've allowed in a passive way Julio to go out into the street and pretend that he is your branch office. He's got your logo on his window and on his card, or on his office and on his card and whatever. These are things that they sound far-fetched, but they're not, and they're very easy to address ahead of time. The facts and the party's conduct drive the decision, which is correct. You can have a contract that says that they're an independent contractor, and it says, it says all the right things, but he's doing all the wrong things. You know it, and you don't do anything about it. Basically, you're going to waive your right to claim otherwise if there's a problem that comes up in that country, and they find that you're that your representative is actually dependent. Okay, next slide.
Sorry.
Next slide.
Here we go.
Hey, David,
Yes, sir.
we got a question here from Bose Hair Care. Let's see what they got.
I have a yeah, thanks, David. I want to go back to the previous slide. You mentioned about the EU. You have a distributor, you have a problem with them. They can sell cross-border as long as it's part of the EU countries, and you can't control that. So the price for our product in Spain could be $10, but in Italy it could be $8, and we can't control that because they're selling it to whoever in Italy. That EU law or regulation, there's no way of controlling that, from what I understand. And you touched on it a little bit, but you didn't get into deep information on that. How do we control that? Is my question.
Okay, let me see if I understand your question. How do you control what? What the prices that
No. So you mentioned that in the EU they can sell across border, right?
Yes.
So I know there's no law in the contract that you can put with any distributor saying you can sell in Denmark, but you can't sell in Germany.
Okay.
They want to accept that in their contract. And the price varies in each country because they move inventory in other parts of the EU at a lower cost.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding your question. Everything you just said is true. So what's the question?
I'm saying, so how do we control that from that happening? Yeah.
Are you trying to control the price? Is that what you're trying to do?
I'm trying to control them from selling from one country to another.
Well, there's nothing that prevents you from appointing another distributor in Spain.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
There's nothing. I'm talking about exclusivity.
Yeah, I understand. They want the distributors in Europe will not. You can say it's exclusive to Spain only, and they won't accept that contract.
That's right. So I guess if I understand your question, you can appoint a distributor in Italy, and you can appoint another distributor in Spain, can't you?
Yeah, but the problem is a distributor in Italy saying, well, your guy in Spain is selling in Italy, and the price of the product is a little lower. And there's nothing I can do about it because we can't control that.
Well, this is a market issue, right? I mean, they whatever the market will bear is what they're going to do. Yeah, you can't control that. You can't control the pricing.
Okay, but let's say you are my distributor in Italy, and I have a distributor. I'm the distributor in Spain. I can take my goods and sell them in Italy, and there's nothing we as a manufacturer here in the U.S. can do anything about it. It's almost no point having a distributor in each country because they can go from country to country and sell and do whatever they want. It's like a free for all over there.
Well, okay. I can't argue with what you're saying. I'm not sure I'd call it a free for all, but my understanding in the EU is that the whole idea is freedom of product, freedom of movement, freedom of people, freedom of money, all of that. And so to try to put parameters around that on what one distributor can do in country A, which is a member country, versus country B, I don't know how you put a parameter on that. What you're talking about is two competitors banging it out with your product. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm selling it to you, David. You're based in Spain, but you're importing it into Italy and selling it there too. And there's nothing we can do it. And the Italians are saying, why would we take your product in Italy when your Spanish distributor is bringing the product into our country anyway? So it's a big mess over there.
Well, okay, I guess it is. My sense of that is that it's, whatever market factors there are will iron that out. I mean, I guess, are you concerned that both of them will say, well, there's no point representing your product because I can't sell it in another market?
I can't control the market. I can't control the market in my own country because you got distributor A from whatever country selling it here in my country. So I'm not
Okay,
sure how your documentation, you said Chamber of Commerce has documentation help. It can help you help with your documentation, but there's nothing that the importers there are going to accept to say you can only sell in your country and that's it. They're not going to go for that. At least the people that I've met.
well, no, you're right. I would, let me suggest this. I confess I don't have a good answer to your question. I don't
know.
think. And we want to finish the rest of this presentation. Maybe we can talk offline.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, because I think there's a lot of issues. I think clearing tariffs is a big issue. You know, who clears the tariffs and then
Sure. That's a huge issue.
yeah, and then I know I believe that you can now get as a U.S. company get a VAT tax number issued under your name. But we can talk
Yeah,
afterwards.
why don't we do that offline so we can finish the presentation for everybody else? How's that?
Sounds good. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So I think some of this on this slide should be self-explanatory. Okay, your contract should be complete. I put accurate identification of parties and contact information. I put that on there for a reason, because sometimes, in my experience, the client is not really, either doesn't give me enough information, or they're not really homed in on who the correct party is they're dealing with. If there's a holding company, or if there's one company that has 5 subsidiaries or whatever. So this should be pretty straightforward, common sense. The term of the contract, how long does it last? Are there sales quotas? Payment and delivery terms. Again, we're talking about in particular Incoterms. Product registrations, licenses, and permits. Let's focus for a second on that. That's huge. In some countries, and for some products, for example, anything that goes in your body or on your body, there have to be tests of that product ahead of time before it can get a registration to be imported. Who's going to pay for that? What happens if the tests fail? What licenses are required? Who owns the licenses? And what happens if the whole thing falls apart? This is an issue that you want to address. What is the required, permitted, and prohibited conduct of your distributor? How do you control the distributor or the agent's use of your intellectual property? Usually that's a pretty simple, straightforward thing where you grant them a limited license to use your trademark, for example, for the sole purpose of identifying the product. That's it, with clear marking that it is that the mark is owned by somebody else. But
David, you're mute now. We cannot hear you.
I don't know what happened there. How about now?
You're back.
Okay. I'm not sure how much time I have left here. Where are we?
We're kind of wrapping up, but David, go forward. It's okay.
Okay. Permitted use and protection of intellectual property. I think that's a separate presentation anyway. Confidentiality is huge, particularly if you have trade secrets, formulas, and whatever. Needs to be real clear in your contract. Indemnities, expiration, termination rights. Why do I put that in here? Again, we'll go to the EU, but it's not just the EU. There are restrictions on a foreign principal's ability to terminate a contract. Okay? There are restrictions on, or there are obligations, if you will, on foreign principals for the benefit of domestic distributors if the foreign principal terminates the contract. It's called an indemnity. Example, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about. In this country here, freedom of contract is so fundamental, we can do almost anything we want. You probably know that. Across state borders, very, very few restrictions. We can appoint exclusive distributors in every state. We can put restrictions on what they can do and what they can't do. All right. And we can terminate a contract. Example, you contract with somebody to be a distributor for the Southeast United States. They spend a year or 2 years developing the market for you. At the end of the 2 years, your penetration of the market has become significant, the distributor did a great job, and you terminate them. In the EU, you're going to have to pay them what's called an indemnity for the residual benefit to you of all the work they did for those 2 years. To me, that's commonsensical. You don't have to do that here. You have to do it in Europe. You have to do it in other countries as well. Again, I got a lot of pushback from people about that. Well, that doesn't make sense. Well, to me, it does make sense, but in any case, it doesn't matter. That's what the law is. So I tell my clients, put that in your contract ahead of time. Offer it to them. Don't wait for your distributor to ask for it. Put it in there. That way you can control it. If you don't put it in there and there's a dispute and some judge in France or Italy or Spain or whatever has to decide what that indemnity will be, it's going to be a lot more than if you would have provided for it yourself. Okay? So put that in there. Termination rights. Normally, you have to terminate a contract with the distributor for cause. All right? What does that mean? Well, we could have a whole discussion on that. In South America, there are a couple of countries you wouldn't believe how they interpret the phrase for cause. Dispute resolution. That's a separate presentation. These are the various methods of dispute resolution. I will just say that the rest of the world thinks that we're barbarians here with our litigation process. They just reject it. It's expensive. It's public, which is a huge problem for many countries. Arbitration is the choice, if you will, for dispute resolution. Again, that's a separate presentation. Choice of law and venue, I mentioned that. Deciding what law will apply. You're not in Kansas anymore from the Wizard of Oz. That's why I put that in there. Provide for a choice of law and a location for dispute resolution that is realistic. There are potentially discriminatory host laws, discriminatory laws in some host countries requiring that you resolve certain kinds of disputes in certain forums in certain locations. China has a little bit of that. UN Convention on the International Sale of Goods, I mentioned, it's a treaty that is signed by most developed countries, pardon me, that automatically applies to your contract for the international sale of goods unless you opt out, which you can do very simply by saying you opt out. Next slide, please. Can't emphasize how important this is. Next slide, please. Same here. Obviously, everybody wants to get paid. There are a number of ways to deal with payment terms. It's a separate presentation. Documentary collection is very much in use. It's accepted everywhere. Documents are everything. Next slide, please. Regulatory issues, export controls, that's a separate presentation. U.S. and foreign anti-corruption laws, I think that's a separate presentation. Foreign anti-competition laws, we talked about it briefly, just very briefly, in the EU. In the UK, they have very strict anti-competition laws and also anti-corruption laws. Foreign import controls. There are foreign import controls. That's another separate presentation, as I understand it. Labeling and packaging is huge. So again, this is another lesson I had to learn the hard way when I decided to move from being a lawyer in an ivory tower into being an executive with responsibilities across the board. There was a point in time when we were doing work for the Chinese Ministry of Aviation Industry. Over a period of, I don't know, 2 years, we probably did almost 200 supply contracts for them. Very complicated, esoteric materials used in aircraft manufacturing, including chemicals and corrosives and what have you. And so in one of our early transactions, we had all this product delivered to Lufthansa at LAX for shipment to, I think it was Shenzhen, but I don't recall. But in any case, in that particular case. And we had a letter of credit that provided for payment, but it had a deadline on it. It expired as of a certain date. Of course, our flight from Lufthansa was prior to the expiration date, and so we were fine with it until we got a call from Lufthansa saying that they couldn't ship the package because it wasn't packed properly. It was restricted material. We had to have it repacked. That was a learning experience. We never forgot it. So again, Mark touched on this a little bit. Packaging requirements are huge. They can delay a shipment. they can delay your payment, they can be really a problem. Quality control certifications are huge. In Europe, for example, more and more they are oriented towards, it's not just Europe, but certainly in Europe, they're more and more oriented to safety with respect to food packaging and processing, and they're requiring certain kinds of certificates be accompany products. So whatever requirements there are, know ahead of time, and all that information is publicly available. Next slide, please. These are just examples of import controls. Again, it's a separate presentation, I believe, for next week. Tariffs are huge. They're getting bigger day by day, as we all know. They're getting more complicated day by day. They're becoming more uncertain day by day, and this is really an issue. Next slide, please. Special attention, pre-import testing and registration. I mentioned this briefly, okay? I had a client that had a product that everybody was excited about, including a whole slew of Saudi distributors. The client sent the product to Saudi Arabia for testing. Instead of sending a relatively small amount, they sent a huge container load of the product to Saudi Arabia. They gave the rights to import the product to a specific Saudi company, and that company took this container of products to a testing lab where the products promptly failed, okay? So now this product is sitting there in Saudi Arabia. Nobody can sell it. It didn't pass. The client is out whatever tens of thousands of dollars it costs to send the product over there. And then aside from the loss associated with the product and the testing and what have you, they don't even own the testing rights anymore because they gave them to the Saudi company for purposes of testing. This is something that you have to think of ahead of time. Again, it can be dealt with in your contract. Responsibilities regarding export controls and reporting. I believe this is a separate presentation. There are export controls in this country. There are reporting requirements for exports in this country. And the export controls and anti-corruption regulations for both of those, the government is virtually unforgiving. Okay, it's strict liability. I didn't mean to do it, or I didn't really know about it, or whatever. The government says, yeah, that's fine, but you're still liable. Okay, the question then becomes, how you actually handled it. So again, these are separate. This is a separate presentation, I think, on anti-corruption and export controls. But the point I want to make from a contractual standpoint is you can't delegate any of these responsibilities to your distributor, okay? You need to put something in your distribution contract that says they understand there are export controls and anti-corruption controls, and that they understand that they can't do anything to violate those controls, and that if they do, that they're liable in whatever kaza. You have to put something in your contract. And if the representative does violate any of these things, you can be sure the Department of Justice is going to knock on your door and try to find out how you tried to avoid that from happening, and what did you know and what didn't you know. Foreign country requirements regarding termination of agents and distributors. I mentioned this briefly a few minutes ago. Indemnities, restrictions on ability to terminate. Some kinds of contracts, depending on how they're worded, you can waive your right to terminate within a certain period of time, and the term of the contract automatically becomes different. Your ability to terminate is affected. You think you can terminate on 30 days notice, but it turns out you need 66 months notice or something like that. These are regulations. Again, I'm talking about Europe here and other places, but certainly in Europe, that you need to know about ahead of time and plan for. And that second to the last line here, address these things or suffer the potential consequences is important. Again, all of these things can be handled relatively easily by contract if you get the right kind of attention ahead of time. Convention on the International Sale of Goods automatically applies, or you have to opt out. One of the problems with this is it's getting better than it was. Judges in this country historically are not particularly familiar with these concepts of choice of law issues, meaning laws of other countries or treaties affecting transactions. So Lawyers often have to educate judges here on how these things apply. But that's our problem. Your problem is to understand that they exist and either accept them or opt out. And you can decide which way to go by just getting the right kind of advice ahead of time. Next slide, please. Okay, these are major issues that I think are pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. Okay, I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on them. We talked to them about most of them. Next slide, please. Assess your needs and resources, assess the peculiarities of your target market, make a realistic assessment and expectation of your foreign representative. No foreign representative wants to be looked at like a one-off, if you know what I mean by a one-off. Relationships are everything, everything, everything. So try to arrange your contract documents such that you're sensitive to the needs, including the cultural needs and constrictions and constraints, if you will, of your representative. They'll affect the performance of the representative, the interest of the representative, and the viability, if you will, of your contract. Ensure all your material terms are clear. Okay, this is pretty straightforward, no matter whether it's a domestic or a foreign contract. Reasonably predictable enforcement, choice of law, and dispute resolution terms. Again, this is going to be a separate presentation, but there are ways to accomplish this. Seek qualified advice before finalizing the agreement. Here's my comment there. We had a program in Ventura years ago where we had the senior U.S. commercial officer in China was the speaker. Fantastic person. We had standing room only, and this person was addressing how to do business in China. And this program was put on by the World Trade Center, and all of us who were service providers with experience in international trade. Lawyers, accountants, bankers, marketing people, transportation people, all in there, all service providers. The first comment out of this speaker's mouth was something like this. Ladies and gentlemen, when I left Beijing, there were $2.3 billion with a B, billion dollars worth of trade disputes on my desk with US companies. 95% of them could have been avoided if they would have just consulted some of the people in this room. Meaning what? Get advice before you finalize your agreements. The information is much more available now than it was when I started doing this. Publicly available from government sources like Richard and Commercial Service and all the great people at the Commercial Service. District Export Council, if I can put a plug in for them. District Export Councils all around the country are trade nut professionals who provide information for free to small and medium-sized businesses. Contact them and you'll get an answer to your question for the most part. Avoid standard contracts, whatever those are. Monitor and enforce your contract terms. If your distributor is not doing what they're supposed to do, say something, do something. Hey, you were supposed to sell 100,000 units, you only sold 50. Maybe we need to modify the contract. Do that rather than ignore it. If you ignore it and there's a problem later and there's a claim in the foreign jurisdiction, the foreign judge is going to say, well, you never really meant 100,000 units because you never enforced it. Okay? So just enforce your contracts and have an exit plan, even if it's potentially a painful one. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, I think we kind of ran through this, but I hope it made some sense and I appreciate your attention. I'll take questions if you want.
Great, David. Awesome. And thanks for hanging out, you guys. Nice job in putting a little bow on this package today, David. A great way to wrap this up. Nice and neat. We did have a question. Bose Hair Care again had a question. We had an issue with Japan on who has the rights to the registered items. So I guess after registration of the product in Japan for sale, who has the rights to that product?
Yes, that's something that comes up not just in Japan, okay?
Yeah.
the way that I would recommend, the only way that I can think of that you can address that in a contract is to say either that the registration reverts back to the principal when the contract is terminated. Okay, explicitly say that. All right.
Okay.
Or the registration expires when the contract expires, something to that effect, so that you have something in writing that makes it very clear that the parties have thought about this and have planned for it.
Okay.
Hopefully that
One thing we didn't delve too much into, but at some point we should have a whole separate session on IP protection, IPR, intellectual property rights, and really.
I'm happy to talk about that briefly, but I think you have a separate presentation on it.
Yeah. But it's all tied together in these contracts a lot of times, just to continue that, that protection of your brand, your copyright, your patent, all those things. So I think we'll have a separate session on that. And
well, let me just say this. From a contract standpoint, you want to make sure that your distributor or your agent rep, whoever they are, that the contract's very clear that they don't own any of this, that you own it. Okay?
Yeah.
And you put a provision in there that explicitly limits what they can do with it. Like I said, you can use it for purposes of identifying the product. That's it. That it's mine. And that's the product you're talking about.
Yeah. Fazil has a follow-up question, David. Can a distributor register the brand under the brand's ownership?
Can the distributor register the brand what?
Can a distributor register the brand under the brand's ownership?
I'm not sure I understand what that means under the brand.
Yeah, the brand's ownership.
Can they register the brand? It's a problem.
I think on behalf of the brand.
Yes, on behalf of the brand. Like, can the owner of the brand be the owner of the registration in a different country?
Sure. Well, I should back up on that. It depends on the rules of that country. Okay. Let me say this. A U.S. company can get an EU trademark, for example, and they own the mark. All right. This is something that's a huge problem because, again, I don't want to go too far into this because of the other presentation, but there are two basic approaches to trademark, for example, brand registration. In the United States, in order to get registration and protection, you have to demonstrate to the federal government that you are using the mark on the product you say you're using it on in interstate or international commerce. Okay? You have to go through a process to demonstrate to the federal U.S. Trademark and Patent and Trademark Office that you're using the mark that way.
Yeah.
Not true in many, many, many other countries. Mexico, for example, are one of our closest and biggest trade partners. All you have to do in Mexico is walk into the office and say, I want to register this brand, and I own it. That's pretty dangerous, isn't it?
First to file.
First to file. That's right.
Yeah.
And that's not just Mexico. So
yeah,
again, it's something you want to provide for in your contract, and it's a strategic and an economic decision going into a market whether you want to get trademark registration, your brand registration in that market prior to entering the market or contemporaneous with it, because it's an expense.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, David, thank you so much. On behalf of all of us, we had quite a few stick around, almost 40 of us. We topped out at about 47, 48 today, so that was very well attended. Thank you so much again, and I know you're available here, and thanks for the plug for the District Export Council. Again, they're having their annual World Trade Week forum, reception, and dinner in Irvine at the University of California at Irvine on May 28th, 5:30 to 8:30, if anybody's interested. And last but not least, next week, session 5, we are going to cover Make export sales and get paid. Something I think we need a contract for again, you know? So how to respond to RFQs, how to use the Incoterms, how to get paid, how to protect against buyer default. So a lot to cover next week, but we're getting into the hard stuff, David. So stick around. We're going to need you.
Richard is
okay.
Richard, it's
All right, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. I want to thank Peter Fu out there, Sandra Kim for all the technical, the chamber, the city, the mayor's office for all their global trade support, the SBA, all of our partners, all of our clients out there. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks for hanging out and have a great rest of the week and keep an eye on those tariffs.
Excuse me, Richard, before you
Yes.
leave, you had mentioned you were going to drop something in the chat. It's Kathy, by the way. You had mentioned you were going to drop something in the chat regarding the tariff situation, but I'm not able to get the chat after we end this meeting. So do you want to just email me?
Yes, I will copy it right now. I see it, and I will send it to you right now.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kesha.
Also, you said you was going to drop the